I call to order the third session of the 2022 annual town meeting. The town clerk advises me that we have a quorum, and I call this meeting to order. I'm Sandy Gadsby, the assistant moderator. I am moderating this evening because Kate Poverman, the moderator, is her husband came down with COVID today. While she doesn't have it at this point, she has some of the symptoms and has been advised by her health advisors not to show up to moderate town meeting. So here I am. We all wish her speedy return to the podium. No one more fervently than me. I want to cover a couple of items quickly. The order of the articles this evening is as follows. We will complete the budget. We will then proceed to Articles 22 and Articles 12 and 13, which will be debated together. If we get through those, we will start with Article 9, 10, and so forth in sequence. Ms. Goldsmith, a question of privilege already.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Goldsmith from Precinct 11.
We can't hear you.
I'm speaking into my microphone. Are you able to hear me now?
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
I'm unmuted. Have you unmuted me on your side? You can hear me, Jeff? Thank you. Thanks. Jennifer Goldsmith, Precinct 11. My point of privilege, first of all, is to thank the assistant moderator for pinch hitting tonight, short notice. Very appreciative. My other point of privilege, though, is I just want to say that.
Could you hold for 1 minute, Ms.
Absolutely.
Goldsmith? We have technical problems on our end, and we'll let you know when you can make your raise your question of privilege.
Are you able to hear me now, Mr. Moderator?
Well, we're not ready yet. We're sorry for the apologies for the delay. Our IT staff is working diligently to solve the problem. And Mr. Yassin, I'm sorry, but we're not going to go back to the departmental budgets for any comments or questions. We had our go at that last Wednesday.
We'll go really fast if no one can talk.
All right, while we're dealing with the technical problems, let me just say a few words about the budget and the current budget being out of balance. If, as is bound to be the case, the budget is out of balance when we finish the budget debate, we will have an omnibus budget vote for a budget that's out of balance. I will not take, after the experience of last Tuesday, I will not take motions from the floor to balance the budget with some kind of reduction of another budget item. It will be up to the select board or the advisory committee to propose at a further session of this town meeting the means of balancing the budget, and whoever's moderating the meeting at that point will decide whether to allow or not allow that motion if it's made. If the budget is out of balance at the end of this town meeting, we will have to balance it at the November town meeting. Okay, Ms. Goldsmith?
Try this again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Jennifer Goldsmith, Precinct 11. Good evening. I have a point of privilege. First of all, I just want to thank the assistant moderator for pinch hitting and to wish the moderator good health. I want to make the point that we as a town haven't traditionally had an assistant moderator when you were the moderator, Mr. Assistant Moderator. And I have proposed to the moderator over the past few weeks, creating a transparent process of application for a pipeline of assistant moderators so that you're not the only person in the whole town with the experience and ability to do this on an evening like tonight. And I implore the Town Meeting Member Association to work with a moderator to develop a transparent process so that we can really train people to have this important but not unique skill set of moderating. And tonight is a perfect case in point of why we need such a process. So the point of privilege is really just to make the case that that's something within the purview of the moderator to do. It's not legislative, but it's really important. And I hope you'll support a transparent process, since nobody knows how someone else could have become assistant moderator besides you. And there was no transparency. So I'll leave it there and wish us a good, quick, and thorough evening. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator.
Thank you. I'm sure the moderator will take your comments into account. We start with the school budget, line item 21 on table 1 of the budget motion. And I call on Superintendent Guillory for a statement from the school administration.
Thank you, Linus Guillory, Superintendent of Schools. We do have a slide deck to share here. Thank you so much. And so before we walk through the slides, I want to just simply say it's my pleasure to join town meeting this evening to present a brief overview of the school department's FY23 budget request. While I would love nothing more than to walk you through all of the many exciting initiatives, programs, and services we're providing to our students, I am mindful, however, of the need to keep tonight's agenda moving forward, as I must be respectful of the 7 minutes that I've been allotted. Before I begin, on behalf of the school committee, I would like to thank members of the advisory committee and the select board for being such collaborative partners in the budget development process. Thank you, school committee, for your support, as well as the entire PSB team for your hard work and dedication. We recognize that these are difficult financial times. Cities and towns across the Commonwealth are grappling with hard choices in light of limited funds. The public schools of Brookline is grateful for the generous support we have received from all levels of municipal government here in the town. We recognize the level of trust that has been placed in us to use these funds wisely, and we take that responsibility very seriously. I also want to acknowledge Town Administrator Kleckner and Deputy Town Administrator Goff for their warm welcome of me to Brookline and their partnership throughout this entire process. And so at this time, we're going to walk through the short slide deck that we have for you. Next slide, please. So tonight we will take a quick look at our mission, a 21-22 snapshot, look at the 22-23 enrollment and budget forecasts, a brief update on our capital projects, and then look at some broad next steps. Our mission: to ensure that every student develops the skills and knowledge to pursue a productive and fulfilling life, participate thoughtfully in a democracy, succeed in a diverse and ever-evolving global society. As we make decisions here in the PSB, as a new superintendent, one of the values that I espouse is that every decision we make must be grounded in improving the access and opportunities of our students. So for our priorities this year, our district theme, we looked at supporting and guiding students to future success, ensuring a high quality education, strengthening a culture of care, and eliminating barriers. And how do we see our students to, through, and beyond graduation as our mantra this year? So as we take a look back at 21-22, here is a collage of photos that represent just a snippet of some of the exciting things that our students have been engaged in this year. I have had the great pleasure of I'm actually coming up on the 1-year anniversary of my start date, and I am amazed at the many, many things that are happening in and around Brookline, from attending the state championship of our boys soccer team, to our students exploring and experiencing their new STEM wing, plays at Pierce, international festivals, groundbreaking ceremonies, the painting of the sidewalks, the releasing of the trout, and many, 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 many activities here in the public schools. And so it's a joy to come to work every day on behalf of our students and staff to make sure that they have the very best that we have to offer. So again, this is an acknowledgement to the hard work of our dedicated faculty and staff, but also to our parents and community for your outstanding support of the public schools of Brookline. Next slide. So during my interview process, one of the items, I'll call it an item, that showed up very quickly in the process was financial stewardship. And how can we, as a school community, get better at what we're doing in terms of financial transparency and accountability. So here are a few of the highlights that we've tackled this year. So for our reporting, we're improving our quarterly reports that go up to school committee. We're continuously refining those and taking feedback on those. We've printed and published a Psb budget book, something that has been absent for quite some time. And we saw version 1.0 of that this year. We'll look forward to seeing version 2.0 next year. We looked at how can we get additional funds in the organization. So we've identified $200,000 in new grants this year, $800,000 in medical reimbursements to the town general fund. We've increased our state special education reimbursement also by $800,000. For the management aspects of it, we've rebuilt our administrative and finance team, and we have transitions that are happening there as well. But we brought on an experienced veteran deputy superintendent of administration and finance. That team has had some new additions brought in position development or defining there as well. We've gained greater oversight into our revolving funds, and we've also looked at how we can improve our Medco fund, one of our largest grants, how we can better collaborate and coordinate on those funds. We've looked for we've looked at many opportunities to gain operational efficiencies. And one example of that is outsourcing our referee payments that are made for our sporting events. And then we've also restructured the procurement card process, which is essentially the manner in which school leaders make purchases for their schools outside of the PO process or the purchase order process. Next slide. In terms of some of the financial achievements for this year, we are making sure that we remain compliant. So we're clearing the hopper of overdue reports. And one of the things that we noticed that wasn't happening here in the public schools of Brookline is that we did not have the oversight of our expense warrants by school committee. And so that's an act that we have brought back to the table or brought back to the district. So each week, a committee member reviews the expense and signs off on the expenses that are incurred by the district. And collaboration. So one of our hallmarks is teaching children to work well with one another and how to work productively with peers. And so we as adults must also model that. And so we've been working very closely with our town staff, many things, but since we're talking budgeting finance tonight, we're looking at talking with town staff about the Munis upgrade, which is our essentially our financial arm or financial software, as well as working with the recreation department. So great partnerships across the town. We're also proud that we've received a clean audit report for the first time, I think in what may be a long time for the district as well. Next slide. And when we look at FY23, this is where things get exciting, more exciting and more interesting at the same time. Next slide. So enrollment, we'll just put it out very bluntly. There is great uncertainty around enrollment here in the public schools of Brookline. Prior to the pandemic, our enrollment reached a high point there in the school year 2018-19 at just shy of 7,900 students. And then pandemic year, the enrollment came down to 7,777 students. And post-pandemic, in the 2021 school year, we're less than 7,000 students. And so there's been a slow climb up. Just this morning, our enrollment is coming in at 7,090 students, which is above the projection, our low projection here as of right now. So what we're providing, or the takeaway message for you here, is that we're looking at 3 broad strokes of enrollment for next year and future years. On the low side, as a single point, what's our lowest enrollment at the time of capture, at the time we created this slide, was 7,016 students. And so if we were to plan for that, that would be 90% of our pre-pandemic enrollment. On a high end, it's using a report that was commissioned several years back, the Cropper-McKibben report, which would have projected us to be about 8,000 students going into next year. And so I think realistically, looking at a number of enrollment factors, community movement, borders opening and closing, all of those types of things, we're aiming for the midpoint and believing that our enrollment will fall somewhere around 7,200 students. So, which would be about 93% of our pre-pandemic enrollment, which allows us great flexibility, not as great as we were initially hoping for in terms of what we were doing with the budget. But right now, we're planning for anywhere between the 7,100 and 7,250 in terms of student enrollment for next year. Next slide. So when we look at our budget request, and for context for those that may not have been following this all along, the initial budget request was $130.6 million. When the committee said, well, what do you want? What do you need? That was the request that came forward. Realistically, though, in terms of what we've worked over the course of these past 4 months is to align our budget, look for efficiency, certainly with not having enrollment at 7,800, we did recognize the need that we had to scale back some of the ask and what we were looking for. So the request for this school year, a local education request, is $128.6 million. And what this does is it carries forward established PSB programming while ensuring updated and innovative instructional practices can still proceed. We are increasing our investment in curriculum materials, early education, educational equity, as well as our English language learners. These were needs that emerged throughout my entry process. We'll continue to support the social, emotional, and academic needs of students. And I think that just goes without saying in terms of the need that our students are experiencing, as well as adults. This budget allocation provides $520,000 for our building department for their needs. And again, the efficiencies that we're looking to maximize are 92% of our pre-pandemic educators, projected for 93% of pre-pandemic students. And the Psb portion was reduced 2.5 million from the preliminary budget request. So that was the 130.6 that I referenced at the beginning of the slide. So in a nutshell, the request or the ask is 128.6. And again, our ARPA committee has helped us out with some one-time funds for this year. Next slide. And then as we look at our capital investments, if you're driving around the community, lots of action is happening in terms of our fiscal plan, the physical plan. Next slide. So Brookline High School fully completed and operational as of February 2022. And a community celebration is scheduled for Wednesday, June 8th. So if you've not been over by the high school of late, there are two brand new buildings that are there, fully operational. And each time I have the pleasure of visiting, I ask the students, how do you like it? And their response is, this is awesome. So especially our freshmen that spent a good portion of their year in Old Lincoln School, to come into 22 Tappan, that's nice and bright. I was over, I think, last Friday in the STEM building, visiting students in the robotics laboratory. It's a very open concept with interior glass walls where you can walk around and see what's happening in classrooms. Very, very much interactive and collaborative spaces in these buildings. And so we could take you through thousands of photos that we've captured this year to just show what's happening inside our schools. But mark your calendars for Wednesday, June 8th. If you don't have that date, and time is around, I think, 4 p.m. for an open house at the high school and the official opening ceremony there. Next slide. Driscoll School, if you've not been over in this neighborhood as of yet, there's a building going up quite quickly. So construction began September of 21, and the anticipated opening is the fall of 2023. So again, a very nice modern facility that's going up there in the Driscoll community off Westbourne Terrace. Next slide. Pierce School, just outside of my window here, I have the pleasure of looking at the historic building. And just beyond that, I get to see I think the 1970s brutalist design building. And so with the support of town meeting and this community, there will be an opportunity for us to commit to Pierce School having a modernized facility. You can see the dates here in June. The schematic design documents are going to be provided to MSBA. In August, the Board of Directors will meet to develop the project scope and budget. And then in the fall of 22, we will be coming to you for a debt exclusion override and a town meeting vote for a new Pierce School. And I believe this, in some of the, and I didn't say this on Driscoll, but it includes geothermal buildings. The Pierce design will include geothermal as well as roof, solar photovoltaic cells, a high performance envelope, low emissions concrete. The historic building will be preserved and renovated, as well as a roof courtyard garden and some overhang shading as well. So lots of innovative designs being encapsulated in the buildings. So, Mr. Assistant Moderator, I hope I didn't go too far beyond the 7 minutes that I was allotted, but at this point, I will conclude that portion of the presentation.
Thank you. You exceeded it by a mere 10 minutes. I have 3 or 4 people lined up to ask questions or make comments on the school budget. First, Ms. Vogt.
Hello. Sorry. Hi, my name is Marissa Vogt. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 6. And this is Tommy. He's going to be a kindergartner at Pierce in the fall. And that's Victoria. She's going to be at Beep in the fall. So my question is, so yesterday the Boston Globe published an opinion piece by a Black student at Brookline High School. The student highlighted racial disparities in PSB educational outcomes, setting examples such as gaps in MCAS achievement rates and AP class enrollments, and criticized the lack of action by the school committee and school administrators. So I sent some questions to the school committee and Dr. Guillory yesterday. And I hope I can get answers to all of these parts. So there's 3 parts. First is what specific actions are PSB taking to address these racial disparities? The second question is, does PSB have a specific plan in this area that would include goals that can be tracked by the public? And the third question is PSB following what would be considered to be best practices in addressing these racial disparities? And if not, what additional resources would be needed? So what specific actions are being taken? How are these going to be, how are goals going to be communicated with the public? And then are we following best practices? And if not, what additional resources are needed? Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
On the chair of, Superintendent Guillory.
Thank you, Assistant Moderator. Linus Guillory, Superintendent of Schools. So for your first question, there are a number of steps that initially, as a new superintendent, we took. One of those is looking certainly at our hiring practices and what can we do in terms of getting more representation, faculty and staff that represent our student makeup and body. So those processes are currently underway. Another initiative that we've taken is looking at the transition from 8th to 9th grade and how those courses are actually being assigned. I believe Xavia's presentation actually talked about her experience in not being recommended for advanced courses at the high school. So that's something that we're also working on. The school committee has actually created a subcommittee focused on diversity, inclusion, and justice. So that's a new forum for matters and or items to come up to school committee. There are also, in terms of what we're doing in our hiring practices or processes, we're also making sure that our hiring managers are also experiencing some form of implicit bias training when they're working to select applicants as well. In terms of specific planning, one of the things that we are looking towards for next year is developing an educational strategic plan. And one strong component I know of that will be some form of racial equity or addressing the disparities and the gaps and those types of things. So you're going to start seeing more concrete plans with targets in there and updates along the way. So this is something that the committee is very interested in. And in terms of best practices, we're looking certainly through our Office of Educational Equity. And that's one of the budget requests that we've actually made this year to expand that office. We're also looking at our professional development of our faculty and staff in a year-wide swath. So there are a number of initiatives that are presently underway in the organization, and we'll continuously seek opportunities to improve and get better.
Thank you. Ms. Childs.
Elizabeth Childs, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My question is about the structural deficit in the budget. specifically the gap between ongoing projected revenues and operational expenses, as evidenced by the use of one-time funding of at least 3.5 million in the school operating budget, but also seen in the underfunding of sidewalk repairs, which precipitated the recent amendment resulting in a budget out of balance, the less than recommended funding for building and road repairs, the need to find another $5 million to pay for the well-intentioned Article 11, and the need to fully fund upcoming contracts, pensions, and benefits. Without a clear and delineated plan to close the structural deficit over 3 to 5 years included in the budget, in good conscience, I cannot vote to support this budget. A structural deficit unattended to impedes our flexibility, sustainability, and opportunities to deliver to our community the excellent town and school services that our neighbors desire and deserve. Although overrides and other revenue growth are likely necessary, alone they are unlikely to solve the structural deficit. Without a dedicated plan to slow the growth of expenses, just like every family is having to do right now to deal with inflation, we will be hard pressed to make our case for these overrides to our community, making their passage uncertain. Our town government will be expected to find ways to live within our means like Brookline families do, in order to garner the support of our community to share even more of their assets through overrides. I am very appreciative of all the work of the advisory committee, the comments made by Select Board Chair Hamilton on the budget, and the previous work of BFAC, including the moderator's committee report, which helped me clarify my understanding of this very significant issue in the current budget. My question to town and school leadership is, what is the plan to close this structural deficit? And when can we expect to see a clearly laid out roadmap to get there? Until that information is included in the budget, unfortunately, I cannot support the budget article. And thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for taking my question.
You're welcome. Ms. Hamilton, can you address some of Ms. Child's concerns?
Heather Hamilton, Chair of the Select Board. I'll do what I can, but quite frankly, I don't really have an answer at this point. What I will say is that in consultation with the town administrator, the Select Board would like to be able to come up with a plan over the next couple of months and come back to town meeting in the fall with a recommendation. So it's the position of the Select Board and mostly the town administrator that we pass an unbalanced budget because the amendment passed, and we will come up with a recommendation to deal with it at the November town meeting.
Well, I think the question went further than the $147,000 imbalance that we're likely to have in the budget. It's how to address the structural deficit that's apparently inherent in our town finances.
To that, I mean, every single community is faced with that. Prop 2.5 doesn't keep up with inflation, and that has necessitated not one, not two, but to my knowledge, 3 operational overrides in the past 20 years. I did say in my budget remarks that the town school partnership will be revamped, and we will be meeting more frequently to talk about what to do about this structural deficit.
Thank you. Ms. Nobrega for the schools.
Thank you, Mariah Nobrega, Finance Chair of the School Committee. I want to acknowledge what Ms. Childs has said, and that it's important that even as we all strive to have excellent services, we also need to be doing so in a way that is as efficient as possible. As a member of the Town School Partnership, I'm looking forward to having more of the discussions that Heather mentioned and how we can structure this effectively. And also, as Dr. Guillory mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the schools are going to be undergoing a strategic planning process that will hopefully also identify additional ways to deliver excellent services at the best price possible, best cost possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thal.
Hi, thank you. Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. I have a question. I don't know if it's for Dr. Guillory or Mr. Rippon about the school department budget for fiscal year 23 as well as going forward. A lot of the budget information that I see, including or regarding future spending, is described in percentages. Specifically, the new contract agreement with the BEU describes and promises educator raises, which I'm glad to see, as a percentage. For our purposes, I would like to know what the dollar amounts will be, dollar amounts required to meet the newly negotiated BEU contract through 2026, which I believe is what was signed. I recognize the answers would be a range because you can't predict exact staffing levels and specific personnel, but I'm assuming there must be some kind of method in place for actualizing the costs that have been promised. So we have a salary line item for 2022 was 112,500,000 and change. FY23 salary line item goes up about 10 million. So I'm looking for 24, 25, 26, what the dollar amount increases will be in the salary line item. Thank
you. Dr. Guillory?
Dr. Guillory, Superintendent of Schools, I'm going to ask our Deputy Superintendent of Admin and Finance to address Ms. Thal's question.
Thank you.
And that's Sam Rippon.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Thal, for your thoughtful question. First and foremost, and I'm looking at the spreadsheet that you referred to with the number for student-facing educators. What you're pointing out is first of all, those numbers are not what's appropriated. Those numbers include grants, revolving funds, and the like. And so what you have before you, the numbers are substantially lower. So I'm going to speak to on that same spreadsheet, what's called the LEA, or local education appropriation, or what you appropriate for F22 in our 121,066,547 budget. Roughly 115 million of it, roughly, I take that back, 105 million is 105,082,963 is for the LEA. For 23, the budget at the 130.6 that we initially requested before we cut it down by 2.5 million, was 113,752,984, of which 1,000,008 was student-facing educators. 24 FTE were reduced, so that number was reduced to just under $112 million, or roughly a $7 million increase, as opposed to the 10 you had spoken of. For 24, 25, and 26, I agree with you, a range is best. And I want to give you, there are 4 moving parts that come to what changes salaries. And I'm going to assume, even though I know what assuming does, I'm going to assume that the staffing is level. Whatever staffing we are in for 23 will carry, no higher, no lower. It's the increase, or what I call the annual wage adjustment, step increases, column moves, or lane increases that are offset by turnover savings. With that, and again, we know what the increase was. For 24, it was 2.5. For 25 and 26, it's 2.75. But when you factor in step, lane, and back off turnover savings, I have a range in 24 between 4 and 4.5%, and then a range in the out years of between 4.25% and 4.75%. So again, looking at that base of $112 million, what you would have to raise and appropriate, 4 points on $112 million. Each point is $1,120,000. That would be approximately $4.5 million on the low end, and about 4.5 to $5 million. And then that just rises by inflation plus the extra quarter point in the out years. So the next year, would be, again, a quarter point on a base of 4 is 6% increase. So, if a base is 4.56, it's roughly 5 to 5.5 million in 25, and then roughly, I'd say 5.25 to 5.75 million of new funds to fund those teachers, same teachers with the settlement. I hope that answers your question. That would be the range I would give.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Jett?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator, Julie Jetty, Precinct 16. I had a question about the enrollment estimates and also a budget line item. And I noticed there was a fairly large range in the enrollment estimate for this coming school year, at least I believe it's the coming school year. And I wondered if that range was trying to account for the additional students we anticipate coming from the Hancock Village development, or whether you anticipate them coming from elsewhere. And then I wanted to know about line item 29 in the budget, which is 1.8 million for classroom capacity. And I wondered if that is aimed at dealing with that coming anticipated possible increase that we have in the enrollment projections, or if that is for existing classroom capacity.
Dr. Guillory, and you don't have to introduce yourself each time. I think we know who you are by now.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Nobrega, the chair of the Finance Subcommittee, to address the enrollment question.
Ms. Nobrega?
Ryan Nobrega, Chair of Finance for the School Committee. The question, would you mind just repeating the question?
Sure.
Ms. Jett?
Is it all right if I restate, Mr. Moderator?
We can barely hear you. Can you get closer to your computer or something to help us?
Is that any better?
Yes, much better.
Sorry about that. I was asking about the enrollment projection, which for the coming year has a fairly large, I guess, uncertainty range. And I was wondering if that is based on, basically what expectations those are based on. Are those based on, for example, the students that we can anticipate coming from Hancock Village, or is it based on something else? And then related to that, I wanted to ask about the 1.8 million in classroom capacity spending. That is line item, I believe, 29 in the town side of the budget. And I'm wondering whether that is in there to address that this entire potential increase in enrollment, or whether that's for existing enrollment capacity solutions. Thanks.
Yeah, Ms. Nobrega?
Sure. Ryan Nobrega, Chair of the Finance Subcommittee of the School Committee. So as far as the enrollment, there is a wide range, but the mid number that you saw projected at about 93% of pre-pandemic students is the number that I would say, I think based on the data that we have, is likely to be pretty close to the final number. That number reflects, if I recall correctly, about 105. I could be misstating that number, but it does reflect some additional percentage or student population from Hancock Village. as well as a small, about, I want to say it's about 250 students, but I could be misremembering that number. Students who would be returning, basically international enrollment that we have not seen in the schools in the past few years due to the pandemic, and now with borders reopening, we are expecting some small amount that is based on previous sort of indicators of international enrollment from previous years. So it does take into account Hancock Village, and it does take into account a small amount of international enrollment. And I guess I would check with Dr. Guillory if he wants me to answer the second question, or if I should, or if someone else from that team would answer the question on classroom
Thank you.
capacity.
Yeah, Ms. Schweitzer.
I think there was a second question though.
Sorry.
I'm happy to answer it. I'll just answer it. And then, so as far as the classroom capacity, the $1.8 million refers to the cost of leases that exist already. Those would be for Temple Emeth, which is the South Brookline Beep site, Beep at Beacon, and the Clark Road site, which houses Beep classrooms as well as some administrative overflow space.
Yes,
And
we
those are
did
established
already-
leases.
Yeah, we already addressed this in the CIP budget. Ms. Schweitzer?
Thank you, Assistant Moderator Naomi Schweitzer, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I want to say thank you to Dr. Guillory, to you and all of our educators for helping our students process what happened in Texas last week. None of us and none of our educators expected to have to do this yet again with our beloved children. I'm aware of the ongoing mental health challenges of students that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And my questions are, how is the public schools of Brookline responding to this need? And what other areas are you seeing? And what other areas are you seeing pandemic impacts? And how has the 2-year pandemic impacted the level of support needed by the average student, and by extension, the cost per student?
Dr. Guillory, do you want to take a shot at that?
I do. And I'm going to tee up our Deputy Superintendent of Student Services, Casey No Miller, to further expound upon it. One of the big commitments that we made here in the public schools of Brookline, and our school committee did this during the pandemic, was the addition of 9 school adjustment counselors to actually work more diligently with our across the board with our students. So that's one big add, and we're committed to maintaining that level of support future forward as long as the need arises. I think can we check to see if Casey is on?
I am on, Dr. Guillory.
Awesome.
Do you mind repeating your questions? I just want to make sure I hit on all of them.
Sure, thank you. Naomi Schweitzer, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. My questions are related to the ongoing mental health challenges of students that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and how are the schools responding to this need, and what other areas are you seeing with students from a pandemic impact, and how has the 2-year pandemic impacted the level of support needed by the average student, and how is that impacting our budget?
I think that's several questions, but let's see if you can't sort them out.
I will try. Thank you so much. Due to the pandemic, what we have seen is an increase in worry amongst our students, higher levels of anxiety, depression, and withdrawal, as reported by students themselves, and of course from caregivers sharing with our school-based staff. I reported at school committee last week with Dr. Matthew Dubois, who's overseeing the development of the social emotional learning program in the district, that the timing couldn't have been better for the school committee and the superintendent to support the addition of the 9 adjustment counselors right when the pandemic hit. And so in terms of responding to this increased need, we do have more mental health professionals. Now, these are adjustment counselors on top of social workers, school counselors, guidance counselors, and school psychologists in all of our buildings, including in all of our schools, including BEEP. In terms of other pandemic-related needs that we have seen from students, again, reported by staff, students, and caregivers, is for some and not all, but we have seen some delays in social skills and coping skills. And so we are very much taking a targeted approach to identifying who these students are who require additional supports.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. George Abbott White, Precinct 9, President, Town Meeting Members Association. I just have a comment. Following on, I'm very glad to see the linkage between the abstraction of numbers and, helpful as they are, and the reality of human relationships. There was mention made by the superintendent of adding specialized personnel to help youngsters, not only with the distanciation that's arisen from the pandemic, but also these repeated assaults upon almost the sacred temples of our civic lives, and I mean our public schools. The comment I would make is that in the introduction, it points out that the enrollment's down, and there's almost an implication that, like a good private business, you cut the staff, except that in smart businesses, at least I'm told by those who know, you don't cut the staff. And in this case, I think it's reassuring to hear that Brookline has access to a number of experts. But I would remind the town meeting members that we have plenty of experts, and they're in the classroom every single day. The person in a school that a youngster is closest to and trusts is that teacher that they see every single day. The more we can do to have more of them with the wide range of expertise that they have, I think the better off for our kids, the safer the kids will feel. And certainly, as the grandparent now of 2 youngsters, the more reassured the grandparents and the parents will feel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Yassin?
Yes, Mr. Gatsby, can you hear me now?
You're fine.
Okay. I hope I'm not alone among all the town meeting members of being a little naive or ignorant about the creation of budgets.
Let's hear who you are, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Martin Yassin, Precinct 17. And I'm not highly familiar with the creation of budgets, and given the considerable range of possible enrollments, I just wanted to understand if Dr. Guilford could, or some appropriate person within the department, could explain to me and hopefully many other people who don't really have our heads around this situation, how exactly does the enrollment, when you actually start the school year, affect the budget? I understand that the state government has to contribute a certain amount of funds, or maybe the federal government too, for each student who is enrolled in the system. But beyond that, I'm at a loss to understand how the budget interfaces with the level of enrollment. And I don't want to get in a highly technical conversation, but if somebody could just explain this a little bit more, it might be very helpful to a lot of people.
Could you give us an overview, Dr. Guillory?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Yashin, for the question. So in simplest terms, the range that we provided was a low, medium, and high. And we are budgeting or building our budget around the mid number, which is around the 7,250. So that's our desired target. What you're talking about in terms of state allocation is October 1 each year, we do a reconciliation to say, this is how many students enroll in the district. We make sure that they're ours and they're not co-living in another system. So the state then says, this is your enrollment for the year. And we go through and we do another snapshot or reconciliation in March. But essentially that October time stamp of how many kids are enrolled in the system becomes the basis for our budget. And in that regard, we have some classroom capacity in terms of seats that may be available beyond that. Most organizations don't get into a spot where you reach a huge tipping point, although pandemic has essentially thrown off any of our known rules. And so we're relearning or recalibrating in that sense. But our budget for next year was based on our October 1 enrollment, which was 6,891. And so right now we're at roughly just north of 7,000. But we also know that in the January timeframe that we do get an increase of students. We get quite a few international students, and depending on when their school years begin and end, or if parents are coming over for some form of fellowship or internship, all of those types of things impact our enrollment. But in simplest terms, the October 1 date is the date we're shooting for. That sets our foundation budget numbers, and we grow and expand and contract on that. Brookline, surprisingly, is a very, we have a core group of students that remain here consistently, but we also experience quite a bit of turnover or transition in our population just because of the desired state of, people coming in for short periods of time in the medical field. So in simplest terms, we're looking for this, we're building classroom capacity to accommodate about 7,200 students or so. We've staffed for that. And our belief is that we will hit that target or pretty close to that target. And if we are to exceed that target, then we start looking for other opportunities to move some things around. But I think right now with our trajectory, and that's why you saw the high number, because we said, well, once COVID ends, and I'm using air quotes for those that can't see me, that we would have expected a backwash of all the folks that left, but we didn't experience that. Actually, the Commonwealth lost the equivalent of Worcester Public Schools, which is about 30,000 students, left the public education setting as a result of the pandemic. So many districts did not receive that return to pre-pandemic numbers. And so we believe that there will be a slow climb back over time, but it's not as accelerated as we thought it was.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Linus?
Thank you very much, Assistant Moderator. My name is Natalia Linos, Precinct 6. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Guillory and the entire team. I'm an epidemiologist. I also chair the Advisory Council on Public Health, and I know how hard, especially your nurses, Tricia, and everybody else has been working. I also know that, as Naomi Schweitzer said, the mental health impact has been tremendous, but so has the educational impact. And I worry about the widening disparities, including for children with special needs, for children who live in households who have been impacted disproportionately by COVID. And I sort of want to go back to the question that I think Naomi was asking, which is, how do you see this impact in terms of the student to teacher ratio? Is the cost per student something that we need to sort of at a short term, 2-3 years, really say that we need to be giving more to these kids right now. I'm a parent of a third grader and incoming kindergartner twins, and I know that the time on parents has been really demanding. We are seeing our kids suffer, and I know that I have seen, I have been in touch with teachers at Pierce for the socio-emotional stuff, but also, my daughter is having, spent first, second, and third grade pretty much out of school. So reading, she is behind in many ways. So I personally feel like we need to say that, that the cost per student cannot be the same as pre-pandemic at this moment in time. I also think that the ARPA funds were appropriate because it is a COVID impact, but I don't know if you could speak a little bit to that kind of investment and what we as town meeting members should be thinking about to support you and your team. And again, thank you so much to you and your team.
Dr. Guillory.
Thank you, Dr. Linos, for the question. So, and I'm going to tee Deputy Superintendent Leslie Ryan Miller up as well to expound upon it. One of the things, so certainly we have concerns about our youngest learners and their trajectory over time in the system. So one of the add backs that this budget is doing is actually returning para educators back to first grade. That was something that was lost over time, and we recognize the need to get our earliest learners as focused as possible. But the theory of action is the longer the student is in the system with us, the more time that we have on track to get them caught back up, in a sense, if I can use that. But then not just caught back up, but then how do we then look at acceleration? So I'm more concerned for the students that are at the end of the line, that we don't have as much time in the cooker than those that are at the beginning of the line. But we're also looking at a number of resources, our child studies teams, looking at what our specialists are doing, our ratios, all of those types of things. Both Leslie and Casey have been working in close partnership with one another for our student services side of the house, but also our curriculum and instruction side of the house. So Leslie, I'm going to pass it over for you to expound a little bit further on what we're doing and what we're thinking about.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Guillory. This is Leslie Ryan Miller, Deputy Superintendent in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Dr. Linos, your question is a great one. I'll just expound a little bit on what Dr. Guillory mentioned. So again, thinking a lot about our child study teams, we are well resourced in terms of academic specialists in both math and literacy, and thinking about what are the particular trainings that would be really high leverage for our teachers to have and our specialists to have that would support them, and really raising those students who may be experiencing some delay due to the pandemic. And so thinking about very specialized trainings like Orton Gillingham and Wilson in math. So doing a lot of thinking about that. Also, working with our teachers to look closely at the assessments that we give our students. What do those assessments tell us? And how can we really look with a laser-like focus on what our students need so that we can bolster those particular schools or those particular scores? And then also, we have been thinking a lot about the essential curriculum. So what are those essential skills that we need all students to know and that build on each other grade to grade so that we're not, we don't have an issue where students are a bit behind and then they accelerate to the next grade and they're even more behind. So it's really kind of the cliche of depth versus breadth. And so we have been being very mindful of that and working with teachers on that work. And, we're awaiting MCAS scores that will be very helpful in helping us to pinpoint what we may need to work on. So we're just being very intentional and very mindful so that we can figure out what it is our students need and then use the highest leverage and most effective strategies to address that.
Thank you. Mr. Homer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. My name is Dr. Charles Homer, Precinct 8. I think we've learned in the last several weeks about the tragic impacts of bullying, the impact of bullying and the impact of people who are bullied and socially marginalized and what they do to our children and society. Last week at town meeting, we had a difficult conversation about school resource officers, and on town meeting association listserv, somebody described the role of school resource officers as providing counseling on bullying, as well as substance use identification and building healthy communities. And an allegation was made that in the absence of school resource officers, those subjects are not covered and that students are not taught about bullying or strategies to address it, which seems unlikely to me, given the emphasis that you mentioned in terms of the priorities and the mission of the school department. So I was hoping that you could share with the members of town meeting what is being done in the schools K through 12 and even before that, and issues of social emotional learning and particularly issues related to bullying, of course, briefly in the context of town meeting. Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Homer, we had a long discussion about this last Tuesday, but I'll let Dr. Guillory give us a brief response to your question.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Deputy No Miller to speak about our SEL practices, and then I'm going to hand it off after Casey finishes back to Leslie to talk about some of the curricular aspects of it, just very briefly.
Briefly.
Thank you, Dr. Guillory. So our school counselors go into the classrooms and provide whole class lessons related to social emotional learning. They're all age appropriate, but are also differentiated for different learning styles to meet student needs with regard to how to process different emotions, big emotions, and to also teach coping skills. We also have, and I know Leslie will speak more to this, but there are social emotional skills that are embedded in specific units and lessons in our curriculum, in particular in middle school in health also. So your instincts are correct that what the lessons that the SROs were teaching in our schools are not the only ones that were being taught related to social emotional learning skills.
Yep. Let's see, Mr. Richmond.
Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. Given that our climate emergency is causing an increase in both peak temperatures and the number of hot days, I was wondering what preparations the department is taking to address safe outdoor activities. This can include mitigation measures such as increased levels of vegetation and the reduction in the use of high heat materials, or adaptation measures such as training policy and procedures to address the health and safety of student athletes and students generally, especially vulnerable pre-adolescent students during high heat conditions. A couple specific examples. Earlier this month, we had days in the 80s and 90s where our playground equipment, such as plastic structures or surfaces such as asphalt or artificial turf, reached dangerous temperatures ranging from 115 to 160 degrees. We have playgrounds such as the kindergarten area at Pierce and the new Ridley and proposed Driscoll playgrounds that are all or nearly all synthetic materials with little or no grass and little shade. Alarmingly, many of these hot plastic materials have only been recently introduced in the last 15 years, which I might add is after my students went through the system. Thank you.
Let's see, Dr. Guillory, would you like to have someone else respond to this?
So I can take I think I can take it globally and then either send it over to maybe the DPW for some of the more broader approaches. But one of the things that we've building leaders have been asked to do is create heat emergency plans. So when it does get warm inside the building, what are the safe opportunities outside? So each of our buildings have come up with plans to address those specifics, or their specific buildings and the needs. But in terms of many of the questions raised around the plastics and what are the longer term plans for the grounds, that's I think that sits within the DPW's realm.
Ms. Galantine? There are certainly other contexts this meeting in which we're going to be discussing this very issue. But let's hear what you have to say about school playgrounds in particular, Ms. Galantine.
Good evening, Erin Chute-Galantine, Commissioner of Public Works. As far as exterior spaces, we look to balance design for not only rigorous play, but quiet observation, access to nature, and both sunny spaces and spaces in the shade. We design for year-round use and access. Much of our year is in cooler weather, and playgrounds need sort of a balance of both shade and also sunny, warm spaces. Our play structures are largely steel and painted. There are some plastic panels and components, but they are minimized. We use poured in place rubberized safety surface that is the preferred product for full accessibility under play structures. So we sometimes use a combination of fiber and rubberized surfacing. And we look to actually, we look at the color of the rubberized surfacing to minimize the heat impact on that. We're always looking at enhanced stormwater management and controls. Say, for example, with Cypress, that plaza space is concrete with pavers. It's porous, and we are retaining that stormwater. So that also helps mitigate the climate impact. And we look at increased tree planting. Hard court space is important to accommodate a lot of children, various games and exercise. It helps kids have fun, socialize, and prepare themselves for better learning once they're back in the classroom. So, you know, our approach is really a balance of spaces, a balance of uses, but we are always looking at vegetation and tree planting and incorporating sun and shade and access to nature.
Thank you. Mr. Levy, the answer to your question is it was the Devotion School that changed its name. The Driscoll School is still called the Driscoll School. Ms. Thal? Calling on Ms. Thal for the second time because I know you'll be pleased to know that I have no more speakers. Ms. Thal?
Thank you, Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. I'm just going to kind of thread together.
We're not really hearing you. Can you get a little closer to your microphone or whatever?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. I'm just going to thread together a couple of different questions that were asked. I live in precinct 16 where we have the Hancock Village housing estate, which is being expanded. There will be 460 new apartments and townhomes there. So enrollment growth at the Baker School is inevitable. And I'd like to know if there is any money earmarked in the budget or potential money to manage enrollment growth when those apartments come online beginning this spring and continuing through the fall and beyond.
Dr. Guillory?
Thank you. So what we've been working very closely with Baker School and Principal Lewis, who's been a champion of advocating for Baker and the potential impact that Hancock Village has on it. So this is something that we are well aware of, and we've made adjustments to his staff as well as his capacity to give room. I think Subcommittee Chair, Finance Department Chair Nobrega alluded to this a little bit earlier when she talked about the numbers that we are projecting right now out of Hancock Village, but we're also leaving capacity there to take on. So, And we recognize that while Baker historically has held a higher number, we also want to make sure that we're also delivering quality there. So we have some contingency plans in place for them as well. The other part is that we've been very clear about our growth and recognizing that we may need to place students in other areas also. So that's also a plan that we have as a backup plan. Certainly we have our buffer zones, but we also recognize the need that we may have a seating capacity in other places, other schools around the district as well. Not as convenient, but it does serve as a contingency for us.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Jesse Gray.
Thank you. This is Jesse Gray, Precinct 10, and the chair of the newly formed Zero Emissions Advisory Board, whose responsibility is to help the town achieve its goal of net zero emissions by 2040, which is a mere 18 years away. And in light of that goal, the bar will continue to go up on climate. And therefore, the new standard for all town buildings will need to be net zero buildings. In other words, buildings that create more energy than they consume. So I wanted to make clear that expectation and the expectation that none of us, especially the government, should be expending new capital expenditures on equipment that burns fossil fuels for decades to come. And I want to make clear that that is my expectation for all future projects in the town, including the Pierce School. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. This is Jocelyn Murphy, Precinct 16. I wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer that was given to Mr. Homer's question, and I regret adding to the school resource officer program, but my question is whether the budget currently has resources to cover the topics that the school resource officer program provided before its termination by the school committee and the select board back in June of 2021. Those topics, of course, included school safety, healthy relationships, substance abuse, cyber safety, and bullying, which of course are very critical topics today. So my question is for, at your leisure, Mr. Moderator, perhaps a member of the school committee, whether there are resources in the budget to cover those topics which were so ably provided by the school resource officers in the past. Thank you.
Ms. Schreiner or Ms. Nobrega.
Mariah Nobrega, Finance Chair for the school committee. I would actually defer to the superintendent or possibly a member of his staff to talk about specific programs
Fine.
in the school.
Dr. Guillory.
Yes, so I think what I'm going to ask Casey to respond to this. Also, Leslie has also done a mapping of the curriculum aspects that the SROs that we're providing. But if the question is the budget that the budget for those staff did not come to the school, so I want to be clear about that. But the services in terms of the curricular aspects of it, we're covering. But I'm going to defer to Casey very quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Guillory. So there is, we are piloting a number of different social emotional learning programs at the school that do cover some of the topics that you listed, Ms. Murphy, in terms of healthy relationships, safe relationships. Building safety is something that we're certainly looking at also in terms of emergency preparedness for our students. So we do have curriculum right now that are in schools that are covering some of the topics. But I can pass it off to Leslie Ryan Miller to speak to the curriculum more specifically.
Hi, Leslie Ryan Miller here. So specifically, many of the topics that were covered via the AWARE program are covered in our 7th and 8th grade health and wellness curriculum, specifically speaking about domestic violence, substance abuse, consent. We've actually done a mapping, and so there are about 20 learning expectations and objectives that were previously covered by the AWARE program that are covered again in 7th and 8th grade health and wellness.
Thank you. I have no one else signed up to comment or ask questions about the school budget, so we will proceed to the non-departmental expenditures, which are found in lines 23 through 35 of Table 1. And I have one person signed up to speak on one of these, a modest item, number 33, printing of warrants and reports. Mr. Wang.
Hello, my name is A1 Wang, and in precinct town meeting member in precinct 8. Yeah, so for the numbers, item number 33, I have several questions. Yeah, so right now, based on the right now, all U.S. government agencies have been instructed to keep paperless records and switching to a digital format by the end of 2022. So the instruction is coming from the Office of Management and also the Budget Department. So I have a few questions for our town. Is like the first one is what is our town's paperless practice? And since it's already been instructed by the government, do we comply with this request by the end of 2022? That's the first question. The second question is like, I check our town, we already use opengovernment.com for interactive budget format. So what is our plan to moving all the town meeting warrants reports to paperless operation? The third question is like, I would like to know what prevent us from moving the current practice to a paperless process. So right now we have a lot of printing, not only the warrants and reports, also there's a lot of like a public hearing, a lot of stuff. So I wanted to know like which kind of like a challenge we have, and is anything town meeting member can help to make it work? Yeah, so that's all my questions.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Goff.
Good evening, Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. So for the expenditures that are in the we call that account the town meeting account. Essentially, it's all of the materials that we use for town meeting, and a lot of that is dictated in our bylaws, what we are required to mail to town meeting members. So we are required to mail postcards to every town meeting member signifying opening and closing of the warrant. We are required to mail the warrant to all town meeting members. We are required to mail the financial plan, the combined reports, and the supplemental mailing as well. In addition, that account also funds the support staff associated with town meeting. The members that are currently in the auditorium with the moderator, there are a lot of staff that really help accomplish town meeting. In terms of trying to go paperless, we have filed warrant articles in the past to try and achieve that. Unfortunately, they were not successful at town meeting. I believe the last time this was discussed, there was a study committee that was formed to try and help address the issue. Unfortunately, that was the last meeting that I had before the pandemic. So that committee was not able to accomplish their work.
And Mr. Ananian, you have another question on this item?
Yes, Melissa, Scott Mannion, town meeting member, precinct 10. Melissa segued into it nicely. I believe that Ben Franco is there helping you with the in the auditorium today, and he was the last chair of the Electronic Communication Review Committee that was formed as a result of that May 2018 resolution. I served on it, but I feel like the chair would be better placed to answer the previous question if he's able
Well, we've already had an answer to the previous question, Mr. Ananian, and I don't think Mr. Franco is on the, is not participating in the meeting. Mr. Birnbaum, question of privilege? Yes. Here, oh, Lee, I'm sorry. Birnbaum.
Hello, Lee Birnbaum, town meeting member, precinct 9. My computer froze for a bit during the answer about the programs being provided by the school district with the SROs out. I am to understand that the only way to gather this information is to stop town meeting and ask for it, since we've been directed not to have any outside communication with anyone else who was present to hear it. So given that, I'd like to hear the answer again.
Well, I'm not entirely certain what your point is, but thank you very much. Moving along, the next items on the table in the budget are special appropriations numbered 36 through 64. Item 36 is dealt with in paragraph 13 of the conditions of appropriations on page 8-45, and you'll be pleased to know that we have already covered items 37 through 64 in the CIP budget. That brings us to not the total of appropriated expenditures of $339,152,497, to which we add non-appropriated expenditures over which town meeting has no control, consisting of state and county charges and so forth, on the second page of, third page, I think, of table number 1, for a total expenditures, total budget of $348,597,306. This exceeds projected revenue by the $147,000 that you voted under item 44 on a week ago tonight. So we have an imbalanced budget, but I will call for an omnibus budget vote. This is the main motion on Article 8, and this vote incorporates all of the separate votes that we passed as we worked our way through the budget, particularly the 2/3 bonding votes. A vote in favor of the main motion is an approval of the at least the budget that we have just concluded. A vote against would be obviously a vote turning down the budget, which would leave us in some difficulty. And I think we're ready for a vote. All right, the voting period is commenced. I remind you that you can only submit your vote once. Yes, in favor of the budget. No, opposed, and abstaining, obviously. Voting period is over. May I have the vote, please? 224 yes, 8 no, 15 abstain. Anybody on the phone? The motion carries by a vote of 224 in favor, 8 opposed, and 15 abstentions. We turn now to Article 22, which you will recall way back at the beginning of the meeting, deferring until the first item of business this evening. The only motion before you under Article 22 is the referral motion on page 22-15 moved by Ms. Jonas and seconded by the petitioner, Mr. Richmond, to refer the subject matter of this article to a moderators committee with a preliminary report due in the fall, et cetera, in the words of the motion on page 22-15. Mr. Richmond, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. I have slides, if those could be brought up, please. Are we going to full screen mode here? Thank you. Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. My co-petitioners are Claire Stamford, former Town Meeting Member and AC member, and Dean Cody, a member of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. Next slide, please. I want to give a brief introduction to fluorinated chemicals, which is the subject matter of this warrant article, a kind of new and technical area, and will come up in later warrant articles, so it's instructive now. Fluorinated chemicals never break down. The carbon fluorine bonds are the strongest in organic chemistry, and they've been dubbed, therefore, forever chemicals. They're virtually impossible to destroy because of that strong bond, yet they're highly mobile in the environment. There's over 12,000 types of PFAS, the most prominent subgroup within fluorinated chemicals, and many have serious health effects, but most are unstudied. They've been produced in high quantities for decades in many applications, thus contaminating the environment and drinking water, contaminating solid waste, our recycling and trash, but surprisingly, it's still largely unregulated at the state and federal level. The priority, this is kind of a global campaign, is to replace these products as quickly as possible, except for those that are not currently substitutable or essential to society, such as medical applications. And most experts and many regulatory agencies call for them to be treated as a class. For example, the Toxic Use Reduction Institute here in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. This map shows is a proxy for total PFAS contamination within the Commonwealth. It only shows drinking water, and you'll notice that Brookline is blank because we get our drinking water outside of town, and so no testing has been done on our surface water, our soils. But most exposure through PFAS is actually not through drinking water, it's through food. But anyway, this is just to highlight the amount of contamination, and you can see it's pretty extensive in Eastern Massachusetts where we are. Next slide, please. So the goals of this bylaw are to address products that contain fluorinated chemicals. We wanted to focus on newer and more specialized ones. They're unrecyclable. We're looking at certain narrow retail product stores, not food establishments, which are already kind of shouldering a lot of regulation already, products that have ready substitutes, and products that have been regulated in other jurisdictions. And if we pass this, and even the referral motion will help support, I believe, the state bills that are still pending in this session, supported by several of our member delegation. Next slide, please. Here's a list of some of the initial products that we were proposing. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of what PFAS looks like. So all you chemistry fans will see some chemical structures on here. You can see they're very different, but the F symbols in these structures stand for fluorine. And you can see they're attached to C symbols or carbon, or in the case of perfluorodecaline, the C is implied. And then some products that are sold in Brookline that use these specific chemicals. Next slide, please. Here are some of the existing and proposed laws that show that these categories are being regulated in states. Again, there's no federal regulation yet, and I wouldn't look for any soon. Next slide, please. This warrant article has had the support of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, which has been discussing PFAS for a long time, and they're concerned about disposal and recycling contamination, the Massachusetts Sierra Club, and one of our faith-based environmental groups here in town. Next slide, please. So the petitioners are supporting the referral motion in response to feedback we've received from our colleagues and friends at the advisory committee and in Department of Public Health and the Advisory Council on Public Health, their ally. So this will allow for more time for education among consumers and businesses about what PFAS is and why we're really, in my opinion, it's the most serious toxic issue we're facing today as a species. It's all self-inflicted, and determining staffing needs for implementation. So a broader community-wide discussion, which could include complementary policies, such as municipal environmental purchasing policies to avoid PFAS and other toxics, such as flame retardants. And this is the kind of thing that could be utilized when purchasing things like interior furniture or building finishes or paints and so forth. Some of these products that, where we know there's a lot of PFAS. So I urge my fellow town meeting members to vote yes on the referral motion and look forward to a robust discussion of this issue and bringing this back, hopefully as a warrant article, possibly by next spring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jonas.
Hi, I'm Elisa Jonas, town meeting member from Precinct 16. I'm speaking on behalf of the Advisory Committee on Warrant Article 22, which is the petitioner explained had proposed to add an article to the town's bylaws to prohibit the sale of products containing fluorinated hydrocarbons within specified categories of goods. As the petitioner has explained, fluorinated hydrocarbons are chemical compounds made of carbon and fluorine, and because of their strong bonds, they do not degrade, earning them the moniker of forever chemicals. And so they remain in the environment and in our bodies. They leach into the soil, and from the soil into water runoff, and from there into water supplies, rivers, and into the ocean. They accumulate in fish and mammals and get into our food and water supply through the crops, water, and animal products we consume. They also can be absorbed through our skin. And when they're in a gaseous state, we breathe them in. And their presence in our bodies has been linked to a variety of serious medical conditions, including cancers, weakened immune systems, increased cholesterol levels, liver damage, reduced infant birth weights, and the list could go on. And health concerns can arise at very low concentrations. In fact, while the federal government has set the maximum concentration in water supplies at an already low 70 parts per trillion, ongoing research indicates that the maximum should be set even lower. With little scientific debate that these chemicals have harmful effects on human health and the environment, the advisory committee is thankful to the petitioner for having brought this article to town meeting, making us all more aware of the issue and forcing us to consider what steps we as a town can take to reduce exposure to these chemicals. The advisory committee nonetheless felt the proposed bylaw would be a challenge to implement. Product labels generally do not provide information on whether fluorinated hydrocarbons are an ingredient, and manufacturers, when contacted, do not always provide the needed information. As a result, neither the retailers nor the town would have the ability to identify which of the many items within a category of products should be taken off the shelves. Advisory committee members expressed several other concerns, including whether for particular items there were adequate alternatives available, whether there had been sufficient analysis of the relative harm to benefit of particular products, and whether we should begin this effort by targeting the businesses that expose people to the highest concentrations of fluorinated hydrocarbons. Nail salons were identified as one such business, yet the proposed bylaw excludes service industries from these restrictions. For these reasons, the advisory committee felt that the substance of the proposed bylaw would benefit from more analysis, with the goal of developing a bylaw that would be both more workable and more effective. So by a vote of 21-3 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends referral of the subject matter of Article 22 to a moderators committee with a preliminary report due by the fall 2022 town meeting and a final report and possible warrant article for the spring 2023 annual meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Ashkenazi, do you wish to be heard?
Thank you. Miriam Ashkenazi, Select Board member, speaking on behalf of a unanimous Select Board. I'm going to date myself, but these next set of warrant articles make me think of that 1982 film with Lily Tomlin, The Incredible Shrinking Woman, the premise of which is a chronic consumer of products gets poisoned by the chemicals in her household products, and she shrinks to a tiny size. How prescient this movie was, as we discover with each passing year more about the chemicals we are exposed to in our environment. In 2017, the Journal of Epidemiologic Community Health published an excellent article, I recommend it, titled Reducing Chemical Exposures at Home, Opportunities for Action. It outlines the extent to which our exposures are occurring and talks about what we know and where we still need to find answers. That said, warrant Article 22, and I'll talk about 25 a little bit, propose a ban and restriction respectively on the sale of certain products in Brookline that have fluorinated hydrocarbons in them or are single-use plastics, including, sorry, Bernard, Select Board Greens shaving cream. The issue, however, here is not that fluorinated hydrocarbons are harmful to human health. They are. However, how we take action to address these issues is important. The Select Board spent some time discussing the challenges of balancing regulation with knowledge, policy, and enforceable practice. We also talked a lot about Bernard's shaving cream. We found this bylaw is written challenging to enforce, and it is a blunt tool when we need something with more precision. There is a risk-benefit calculation that has to be made. We need to understand more about which products can be sacrificed, such as Bernard's shaving cream, and which can't, until there are acceptable replacements, like a fire retardant clothing for our firefighters. This is true, frankly, of all 4 warrant articles. We need nuance here. We need to understand the next steps forward in a thoughtful and intelligent way with a science and population health lens. I also thank the petitioners for bringing this discussion to the forefront, but we are not yet ready for moratoriums, bans, or similar restrictions till we have more information and can make more thoughtful decisions. We should not legislate and create policies with a bludgeon, but rather an engaged, transparent, carefully thought out, and inclusive process. For these reasons, on warrant Article 22, the Select Board voted favorable action on the referral motion offered by the Financial Advisory Committee, referring the warrant article to a moderator's committee for further study. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen Kraut. K-R-A-U-T.
Hello, thank you. My name is Karen Kraut, and I am speaking in support of warrant Article 22, which at this moment means I support the motion to refer it to a moderator's committee. I am not going to go into detail, as the other 2 folks did, about the large, complex, and ever-expanding group of chemicals that we are widely using to make various types of everyday products. We call them PFAS. I will just restate the 5 key concerns about PFAS, which are its widespread occurrence, the numerous amount of exposures humans have to it because they're in so many products globally, the growing numbers of PFAS, over 14,000 and counting, the persistence that a few people have already spoken to about how it remains in the environment and the body for unknown amounts of time because of the bond, and just the idea of bioaccumulation. When they enter the food chain in various ways, they gradually accumulate and remain in the body. As well, the research conducted, as someone else has said, has indicated many adverse health outcomes as a link between human exposures to PFAS. And I want to just say specifically that I believe every level of government, federal, state, and local, needs to exercise increased and sustained leadership to truly make progress on PFAS. I hope that town meeting members can all agree that this moderator's board should take a comprehensive review of this PFAS problem and identify solutions that Brookline could implement right away. For example, the town could commit not to purchase products containing PFAS like artificial turf and carpets and certain paints for town schools and town buildings and schools. I believe Brookline should go as far and as fast as we can to keep our families safe and to get these toxic chemicals out of our communities. I want to just add that I do personally believe that the concept of a moratorium is not just a bludgeon, it is an opportunity to pause and not go forward until there is more information. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Louise Bowditch. BOW. I'll take that motion. I've already called Ms. Bowditch, so let's hear from her.
Good evening. My name is Louise Bowditch. I live at 23 Cushing Road, and that is precinct 5 in Brookline. I don't need to take time because the speakers prior to me in line have covered this topic, except for one item which sticks with me as critical to look at, and that is contamination of our water. PFAS is in the water, it's in the lakes, it's in the streams of our state. That means that the drinking water for our kids, all of the citizens of our town, is probably contaminated. This is not a wise thing for a town like Brookline to do anything except take a strong leadership role. Karen's right. At every level of government, we need to address this, and we cannot allow PFAS to contaminate the drinking water of our town. And we need to address this now. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, I have a question from Ms. Friedman, and that's it. So I'd rather hear from her and perhaps quickly dispose of her question than to have call the question and go through that whole process. Ms. Friedman?
Hi, thank you. Wendy Friedman, Precinct 5. So I guess I think I'm having some questions sort of about all of these various related warrant articles. So like many people, I think, I've been really struggling with these PFAS and microplastic warrants, kind of weighing the costs and benefits of different things. And even though we're not on warrant 24 right now, I just want to start with that. And just to say that, I think like everybody, I've received numerous emails about that warrant from people saying, we can't kick the can down the road. We have to make sacrifices.
Let's please focus on 22.
Well, they're related, because my question, since this is about kind of referring this to a study committee, I'm trying to understand how to think about these together, I guess.
Well, you don't think about them together, ma'am.
Well,
they're separate issues, and
I mean,
they'll
I
be
do.
voted on separately.
Well, I guess my question then, to cut to the chase, is I'd like to have a sense of if we were to do this, if we were not to not refer, and if we were to actually do this, the moratorium, how much, what would be the impact environmentally? Like the reason we want to do this is for environmental purposes and for health. And I'd like to have a sense of the impact of something like this versus the impact of the turf ban. Since the petitioner is the petitioner for all of these warrants, I'd like to have a sense of how much impact each of these would be able to make in what you're trying to achieve.
Well, Ms. Friedman, I'm not going to allow that question. We have nothing before us but a motion to refer. And we're ready for a vote on that motion. It's on page 22-15 to refer the subject matter to a moderator's committee, et cetera. And a yes vote is in favor of a referral, and no vote is opposed. We're ready for a vote. Voting period has commenced. Ready for a vote? Motion carries by a vote of 231 in favor, 12 opposed, and 5 abstentions. We now turn to Articles 12 and 13. They'll be debated together. Under Article 12, the main motion is on the pink supplement number 1, pages 1 to 13, moved by Mr. Ananian, seconded by Ms. Wu, to amend the CDICR bylaw in a manner in which you will hear discussed exhaustively. during our debate. There are two amendments. The first on page 10 of supplement 5, moved by Mr. Pollock, seconded by Mr. Doughty, to delete from the petitioner's motion the power of a committee to be appointed under that motion to levy fines. Question of privilege? Oh my goodness, Mr. Benson, if you're going to take me to task for having not having an answer response to Ms. Friedman, you please don't waste your breath. But go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Benson, we're waiting. Well, okay, I'm going to continue with an explanation of the motions under Articles 12 and 13. The Pollock motion would delete the power to fine. Second motion on supplement 7, page 1, moved by Mr. Rosenthal to delete the power to issue subpoenas by this committee. I need a second to that motion. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. And finally, Mr. Benka moves, Mr. Lynn Jones seconds, motion to refer both Articles 12 and 13. The motion is found on supplement 3, page 1, to refer the subject matter of these articles back to CTOS, I'm sorry, to the Committee for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations for further study. The motions under Article 13 are a motion in the words of the article on pages 13-1 to 12. And if you'll turn to page 13-1, I have to walk you through the conversion of a warrant article to a motion. Instead of leading off with to see if the town will amend, the motion would be voted to amend. And I believe that's it. Yes. It's the only change you'll need. And the motion that will either entertain or not entertain on 13-1 will depend upon the voting under Article 12. And it's a little complicated, and I'd prefer to wait until after the debate, when it comes time to a vote, to run through the voting sequence. But suffice it to say that the first motion will be that of Mr. Benka and Lynn Jones to refer the entire subject matter. And if that passes, that will end the debate. I call on Ms. Nobrega, principal petitioner, for who will have, yes. All right, Mr. Benson, before we hear from Ms. Nobrega, we'll hear your question of privilege. You can speak, Mr. Benson. We're waiting with bated breath. So I'm afraid that there's something preventing you from speaking on your end, and there's nothing we can do about it here. So I call on Ms. Nobrega for You will have 15 minutes to explain the petitioner's position on this article. Ms. Nobrega.
Thank you. I believe I have slides, if those could get pulled up.
Don't forget to identify yourself.
I shall not, thank you. Mariah Nobrega, co-petitioner of warrant articles 12 and 13, and former member of the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, also known as the CDICR. I will be introducing these warrant articles on behalf of my co-petitioners, Deborah Brown and Sandy Batchelder, as well as the CDICR itself. These warrant articles would provide a revised discrimination complaint process for Brookline. This presentation will summarize the work that was done and why that work was done. I also want to make sure that everyone is aware of what we are talking about when we say discrimination. It is not because you own a dog, for example. Discrimination is inequitable treatment that's specifically related to race, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, disability, age, religion, creed, ancestry, national origin, military or veteran status, genetic information, marital status, receipt of public benefits, including housing subsidies, or family status, for example, because one has or does not have children. Next slide. Let's cut to the chase. Why vote yes? By voting yes, you get the chance to do the right thing. By voting yes, the Brookline community gets a thoroughly considered discrimination process, complaint process that one ensures that people, residents, employees, and visitors who experience any form of discrimination receive appropriate support, that there is a fair and timely process for resolving discrimination complaints, and that anyone who has experienced discrimination has their legal rights fully met. 2, ensures that there is a plan to identify patterns of discrimination and take actions to reduce the sources of discrimination. By voting yes, you can show that you take discrimination seriously and want to address it, whereas by voting no, you accept the town's insufficient method for dealing with complaints. To vote no is to accept the status quo of lawsuits filed, but more importantly, of lives destroyed. This can be you, your neighbor, your family member, your friend, a person passing through. We all deserve not to be discriminated against, and yet we all know of discrimination, including high-profile cases in town. Brookline, it's time to do better. Next slide, please. For those of you who might say, but what about the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, MCAD? Well, this is news coverage from WBUR in the Globe yesterday. The article states that the MCAD ruled on just 6 cases last year, and it took an average of 10 years to get that MCAD ruling. It takes 3 months to even get a meeting with an MCAD staffer to file a complaint. That state option is no option at all, because justice delayed is justice denied. Brookline, we can do better. As you will hear shortly, the process that is being proposed in warrant article 12 is time-bound and would investigate complaints within a few months. Next slide. Before providing an overview of the proposed discrimination process, I'd like to provide a bit of a history lesson, especially for the many new town meeting members. In fall 2019, town meeting member Arthur Conquest, who you see pictured here and you will hear from next, brought a warrant article to town meeting to change the existing discrimination complaint process, which is contained within the bylaw that describes the CDICR. Yes, there is a discrimination complaint process, though it is not considered sufficient and very few complaints are made to staff. Brookline, we can do better. Arthur's explanation says it all. The purpose of this article is to have the town of Brookline take responsibility for rectifying racial discrimination and other discrimination complaints by requiring a town board to investigate such complaints and make written findings as to their merit and to recommend appropriate actions to resolve such complaints. The existing procedures do not go far enough. Next slide. At the time, the edits that Arthur proposed to the CDICR bylaw had some specific challenges to implementation. For example, as drafted, it would have the CDICR members themselves do the investigation without training, without structure, without even necessarily the desire to do so. However, the CDICR report on the warrant article explains why they advocated for favorable action with a delay in implementation. I quote, "Although the CDICR recognized these challenges, we also recognize that to vote no action was to accept the town's insufficient method for dealing with complaints. The CDICR felt that this is an opportunity for those who are not satisfied with the town's lack of methods to appropriately and holistically address complaints. Therefore, the CDICR voted in favor of the warrant article with the amendment that it will not take effect until July 2021, which was extended to July 2022 due to the pandemic. Town meeting agreed, voting favorable action with the delay, and with the common understanding that a separate complaint process would be developed to replace the proposed bylaw changes. This is exactly what has been done and what you will be voting on tonight. Next slide. At the time, the advisory committee also acknowledged the challenge of discrimination in town. And I quote, "The advisory committee recognizes that instances of bias occur, and it agrees that there should be a way for victims to channel their desire for help. Not all complaints of discrimination processed by the CDICR and subsequently by the MCAD have been resolved, and referral of relatively minor instances of bias are not given priority by the MCAD." Next slide. In its 2019 report, the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, known as CTO&S, outlined a process, and I quote, "A prospective study should be undertaken by a diverse committee with considerable specialized knowledge, not only of existing town procedures, but also of potential interactions with federal and state laws, as well as regulatory agencies, including privacy rights and requirements of civil rights, civil service, and employment laws and procedures." This committee is exactly what the CDICR Complaint Process Committee was. Next slide. So following the 2019 vote, who drafted the revised discrimination complaint process and what did they do? Complaint Process Committee members include CDICR members and town meeting members. They include 6 current and former practicing attorneys, subject matter experts, town officials, a psychiatrist, and other interested parties. The HR director and chief diversity officer were ex officio members of the committee. Town Council Michael Downey also advised the committee and reviewed the draft. The committee invested almost 2 years in developing this bylaw, meeting over 30 times as a body in addition to offline work. The committee reviewed national best practices and comparable processes from Arlington, Newton, Cambridge, Medford, and Somerville. Then we went to work applying what we had learned to Brookline's situation. This was no hive mind or rubber stamping. Members of the committee had very different opinions, and we had vigorous debate about the discrimination complaint process. We heard from the public, taking public comment at meetings, holding several public hearings, and widely distributing the draft revisions within the community. And we incorporated the feedback where the committee deemed appropriate. Ultimately, we converged on a process that gave redress to people who have been discriminated against, while also recognizing the complexity of the space in which the committee would work, including privacy, confidentiality, federal and state laws, other town procedures, employment law, and collective bargaining agreements. Following submission of the warrant article this February, members of CTO&S were very collaborative in further refining the language, and the amended language reflects nearly all of the CTO&S recommendations. Petitioners also worked closely with the new town council, Joe Callanan, who had additional suggestions beyond those previously provided by town council Michael Downey. Next slide. I'd now like to walk you through the new section of the bylaw that deals with complaints so that you can see what it's about. The green sections that you can see on the screen show the edits from CTO&S that were adopted by the petitioners. I show this so that you can understand how seriously we took their recommendations. All of what we will be focusing on is within bylaw 3.14, which is the CDICR bylaw, and specifically within a new subsection 3B. There were a few other edits to the bylaw outside of this section as well, mostly relating to a general strengthening of privacy and confidentiality, as well as a strengthening of the ombuds role of the chief diversity officer. Next slide, please. Subsection Roman numeral 1 is about the process, which is intended to be accommodating. Next slide, please. So subsection 2 is about the membership of the complaint committee. The committee would be composed of up to 7 Brookline residents with relevant backgrounds, including civil rights attorneys and other relevant civil rights experience. I highlight this just to point out that there would be some people who are highly trained on this committee. In addition, the committee would be trained by town council. They would be appointed by the select board to renewable 3-year terms. And they would, as part of their initial work, adopt and publish regulations and procedural rules, all relating to due process. Next slide, please. Sections 3 and 6 deal with receiving and directing complaints. So there would be a complaint form, but the complaints would also be accepted orally. The form has to be signed and sworn as to the truth of the allegations. The form can be, the complaints can actually be received not just by the Chief Diversity Officer, but also by members of CDICR or a complaint committee. And as part of this intake process, the complainant would be actually advised by the CDO as part of their ombuds role of alternative venues in which to file complaints and encouraged to pursue alternative dispute resolution altogether. Finally, a copy of the complaint would be given to the respondent. Next slide, please. The initial screening of the complaint would be, that's covered in sections 4 and 5, and it's a private screening by the Chief Diversity Officer to evaluate whether the complaint could be plausibly discrimination. And if the complaint is screened out, then the complainant has the right to appeal. Next slide, please. Sections 7 and 9 are about the investigation itself. And as I mentioned earlier, there would be published rules of procedure that the investigation would follow. It could include interviews, review of relevant materials. The process does allow for subpoena, and I will come back to that a little bit later. And then there would be a report produced by investigators. Next slide, please. This is about the appeal. It follows a similar process, but it actually has an expanded review panel, including a civil rights attorney. And the appeal investigation result would actually supersede the original investigation. Next slide, please. Section 10 is about if there has been a violation. So town violations by the town itself or by an employee, agent, or official of the town get turned over to the select board, or in the case of school issues, to the school committee and or the superintendent. And other violations, the primary action is a notice of violation issued to the respondent. There are fines possible under certain scenarios, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Next slide, please. Section 11 is specifically about prohibiting of retaliation. Next slide, please. And then sections 12 and 13 are about, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't just about the incidents, but about looking at patterns of behavior and eliminating larger trends over time. Next slide, please. There are 2 areas in the revised bylaw language for which amendments have been submitted, which we believe are important to retain and would ask you to vote no. First is the ability to issue the subpoena. This is the subject of the Rosenthal Amendment. Town Council has opined multiple times that the power to issue subpoenas is upheld in a case Bloom v. Worcester. Town Council has also made clear that should the subpoena be ignored, Town Council would only go to court to enforce the subpoena at the direction of the Select Board. So to make this very clear, the power exists in other municipalities and can and would only be used in close collaboration with the Select Board and Office of Town Council. My co-petitioner, Sandy Batchelder, will speak more about this. Second, the ability to issue fines. This is the subject of the Dowdy-Pollock Amendment. We petitioners believe that the ability to issue fines is important as a deterrent. The issuing of fines is highly complex due to previous case law and can only be considered in close consultation with Town Council. As mentioned previously, the amended language now would have the committee primarily issue a notice of violation to offenders. Next slide, please. Now, to the decision in front of you. Select Board has voted no action on this warrant article. I believe in part because Town Council has told Select Board that he can work with the Chief Diversity Officer on a workaround of the 2019 language. I'm frankly disappointed that we would even consider running a matter of this significance in this fashion when a committee of experts has spent years crafting the proposed language. CTO and us, an advisory committee, have both made motions to refer this back to CDICR for further consideration. However, CDICR has made clear that unlike last time, they support this language. Brookline, it's time to do better. Vote no action on referral, no action on the amendments, and favorable action on the amended version submitted by the co-petitioners. However, if one or both of the amendments should pass, we would still seek your favorable action, as we feel strongly that the substance of the amended version is infinitely stronger than any workaround by town staff. Further, we request favorable action on warrant Article 13, which is the necessary housekeeping article accompanying 12 in whatever form 12 takes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nobrega, and thank you for coming in under your 15 minutes. I owe Mr. Benson an apology. His question of privilege was to request a 5-minute break. I have to say that when I'm moderating these sessions, I do not have any breaks. I trust that those of you who are attending from the comfort of your homes can manage your breaks as necessary without halting the proceedings of town meeting. I call on Mr. Pollock, Mr. Benka, and Mr. Dowdy, who will have a total of 15 minutes. P-O-L-L-A-K.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Pollock, Precinct 11, and Advisory Committee member, speaking for the Advisory Committee. My remarks are not for or against, and are intended, at the request of the Advisory Committee Chair, to clarify the history of Bylaw 3.14 and how complaints of discrimination are dealt with currently and under different outcomes of tonight's votes. A little later on, AC Chair Dennis Dowdy will present the AC's recommendation. From 2014 through today, complaints of discrimination are dealt with by the Chief Diversity Officer, who provides information, mediation, and dispute resolution opportunities, but, quoting from bylaw, without investigating or making determinations of fact or drawing any legal conclusions. 2019 special town meeting adopted changes that are not yet in effect, so that, again, quoting, the commission shall, 1, investigate the complaint by interviewing the complainant and any witnesses, 2, prepare written findings, and 3, recommend appropriate action to the select board, library trustees, or moderator as appropriate within 90 days of receipt of the complaint. The 2.5-year delay in putting these changes into effect was provided so that CDICR could come back to town meeting with revisions to the bylaw to propose an implementation plan and address concerns that were voiced at that time. Warrant Article 12 has been significantly reworked over the past 6 weeks, and only 2 particulars are being debated tonight: whether or not to provide the complaint committee with subpoena powers and fining powers. The major decision before us is whether to create a quasi-judicial complaint committee made up of appointed citizens to conduct investigations and issue findings, with or without subpoena and fining powers. If Warrant Article 12 is not approved, there will be no complaint committee. Whatever we vote tonight, the changes enacted in 2019 will go into effect on July 1st. The anticipated timeline for having the complaint committee up and running is about 1 year if Warrant Article 12 passes. And if it fails, it will also take considerable time for the commission, CDICR, to determine how to move forward in a different way by investigating and preparing written findings as required and/or proposing some other approach to a future town meeting. For those who favor the current practice of providing information, mediation, and dispute resolution opportunities, and leaving investigations, findings, and possible sanctions to other bodies, including the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, that is not before us. The best immediately available alternative would be to vote for CTO&S's referral motion, which will initiate further public process to find our way forward. Thank you.
Mr. Benka.
Thank you. Dick Benka, Precinct 14, speaking for the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, recommending referral of Articles 12 and 13. I'll highlight some history and then describe the game changer that led to our recommendation of referral. As David Pollock has noted, the Town Discrimination Complaint Bylaw dates back to 2014. As originally conceived, complaints were to be processed without any investigation or any findings of fact, and simply with concerns reported to the appropriate official or board. In 2019, perceiving this 2014 version to be ineffectual, town meeting member Arthur Conquest proposed changes. CDICR would investigate and would make findings of fact. Action would be recommended to the appropriate body, and there would be a 90-day time limit. CDICR, while supporting these changes, identified a problem. Members felt they, quote, did not have the necessary background to effectively carry out the proposed changes, unquote. As a result, CDICR said, don't make the 2019 amendments effective until 2021 to allow revisions or different committee appointments. That date was extended to July 1st, 2022, which brings us to warrant articles 12 and 13. Despite the time and effort involved in the drafting, there were issues. Petitioners worked productively with CTOS to address some of the most troublesome provisions of articles 12 and 13. But there are still significantly different views about some fundamental questions. On the one hand, are concerns about provisions remaining in petitioner's proposal. Fines, which could target some local businesses, but not large entities with multiple victims. Subpoenas that could likewise have inequitable impacts. The express intent to allow neighbor versus neighbor complaints. The fact that those fines go to the town. Despite justified criticism of MCAD delays, the MCAD can make awards that actually compensate discrimination victims. Concerns about due process violations with volunteers in a quasi-judicial role, with potential liability both for the town and those volunteers. On the other hand, there is petitioners' belief that existing processes for addressing discrimination are not useful, that the town and the MCAD basically bury complaints, and that it is therefore necessary to create a different venue for complainants. Petitioners also emphasize that if Articles 12 and 13 didn't pass, the 2019 amendments, which CDICR said it didn't have the ability to implement, would go into effect. CTO&S believed that we had done all we could with the language of Article 12, but that the foregoing positions reflected fundamental philosophical differences. Town meeting, we believed, had to decide whether to implement Articles 12 and 13 with their potential pitfalls, or to have the 2019 amendments go into effect when CDICR said it didn't have the background to implement them. And then came the game-changing event. At the May 17th Select Board meeting, Town Council was asked whether he would be comfortable if Articles 12 and 13 failed, and we thus ended up with the 2019 amendments. He pointed out that the 2019 amendments had already been approved by the Attorney General, while Article 12 was likely to lead to litigation challenging its validity. But then Town Council added something else. He pointed out that the 2019 amendments didn't specify who would do investigations. CDICR, he said, could delegate its authority under the 2019 amendments to Town Council's office. This would provide an elegant workaround to CDICR's stated inability to implement the 2019 amendments. In other words, we didn't need to pass Articles 12 and 13 to avoid an enforcement vacuum. To the best of my knowledge, nobody had asked this question in the 2.5 years since the 2019 amendments were passed. But we now know that investigations and findings contemplated by the 2019 amendments with those time limits, as well as procedures to ensure due process and coordination between departments, can all be done under the direction of a professional town council who previously worked on civil rights in the Attorney General's office, in private practice, and as town council in another community. And we can begin that process immediately without the appointment of a new committee, training, litigation challenges, potential volunteer liability, and all of the perceived issues with Article 12. At the same time, CTO&S recognized the significance of petitioners' concerns that motivated Articles 12 and 13, and thus was unwilling to recommend no action. but we do strongly recommend that Articles 12 and 13 be referred rather than implemented. If changes are actually needed after seeing how delegation to town council works in practice, a future warrant article can always be submitted. But if delegation works well, we will not have needlessly created a complex and potentially problematic structure. Thank you.
Mr. Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator Dennis Doughty, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3 and Advisory Committee Chair, speaking for the Advisory Committee. The full Advisory Committee engaged in more than 2 hours of debate, including again this evening on these motions. And like the article in question, our position is complicated. In short, we now recommend favorable action on the CTO&S motion for referral. If that referral motion should fail, we support the Pollock-Doughty amendment to remove the fines, and we support the Rosenthal amendment to remove subpoena power. But no matter the disposition of these amendments, we still recommend no action on any version of warrant Article 12 that would come to a vote. The primary arguments in favor of supporting any version of Article 12 can be summarized as follows. Discrimination is real. It exists in Brookline. Town meeting overwhelmingly supported the intent of this article back in 2019. This implementation strategy has been extensively worked on, including in public hearings with CTO&S and advisory, resulting in the articles before us tonight. Enacting these articles would provide a new tool for changing behaviors in a positive way. In short, supporters of Article 12 on the Advisory Committee see Article 12 as the next step in realizing the vision that was voted in 2019, and believe that any of the remaining concerns that I am about to discuss are things that will be worked out during implementation, which, as noted, will still take some time. But the majority of the Advisory Committee had many reasons to oppose Articles 12 and 13. Let's start with the simplest one. There already exists a valid avenue for pursuing complaints of discrimination, MCAD, which is staffed by trained professionals, whereas the town process proposed by Article 12 would be staffed by less well-trained volunteers. These volunteers would be hard to recruit and would require extensive and expensive training. Any mistakes made by this committee, such as failure to follow due process, being biased or not impartial, etc., would open the town up to legal liability. Town council believes that the town will certainly be sued if the complaint committee issues a fine. Some on advisory believe the town would face lawsuits as the committee started investigations or questioning witnesses, especially if those questions came as the result of subpoenas. Subpoena power was a big concern. It was pointed out that there are few existing committees which have such authority, and those that do derive such authority explicitly from state law. In addition, members did not see that the town process would provide additional value over the state process. For example, injured parties do not have any opportunity to receive compensation as they would via the courts or through MCAD. Many expressed the concern that this process could add confusion, which might act as an impediment to the other processes. This would add new costs to the town, both in the form of the training costs needed for the volunteers, as well as the operational costs mentioned by the Chief Diversity Officer. Members expressed concerns that privacy will not be guaranteed throughout the process and for the reputational harms that could result from well-intentioned but ultimately dismissed complaints, especially neighbor versus neighbor. The Advisory Committee was particularly sensitive to the equity concerns raised by CTO&S regarding the disparate abilities of businesses to respond to complaints or be subject to the committee's findings. And finally, many members were concerned about the composition of the committee itself. What does, quote, civil rights experience, unquote, mean? Does it mean experience with civil rights law? Does it mean having suffered discrimination? Does it mean participating in a march? Should we not be much more prescriptive in ensuring proper diversity and appropriate experience on this committee? Now to our recommendations. By a vote of 14-9 with 1 abstention, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on the CTO&S motion to refer the subject matter of the warrant articles back to CDICR. Should this fail, by a vote of 19-1 with 1 abstention, the Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on the Pollock-Doughty amendment, which removes fining authority from the petitioner's motion. By a vote of 21-3 with no abstentions, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on the Rosenthal amendment to remove subpoena power from the petitioner's motion. And if any version of Article 12 comes to a vote, by a vote of 13-2 with 8 abstentions, the advisory committee recommends no action on Article 12. And should some version of Article 12 pass, the advisory committee does support Article 13 by a vote of 11-1 to 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conquest.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Fire away.
Thank you very much. Arthur Conquest, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. I'm asking you vote favorable action on the main motion, Article 12, and against the substitute motions. I quote from a letter written by Ms. Keisha James, an 18-year-old Native American and student then at Wellesley College, who was part of a group that was filing a warrant article to establish an Indigenous Peoples Committee in Brookline. Quote, the very first meeting I attended was an AC subcommittee meeting in either September or October of 2017. One town meeting member was incredibly racist towards us, and she kept making racially insensitive remarks, including one about how, quote, she didn't think there were any Indians around because she hadn't seen a casino in the area, unquote. She continued on to make these remarks at every subsequent meeting, which we attended. At the October 17, 2017 AC meeting, we were threatened with arrest and sworn at. Almost every single person on the committee made racist remarks and offensive comments. It was truly an insulting experience, and I was in a state of shock for days afterwards because I had grown up in Brookline and had never expected anything like that to occur. I sent a letter about what happened. I've also attached a letter from one of the witnesses, Arthur Conquest. Here is proof. He sent a letter and also proof he was willing to produce witnesses to corroborate what had happened, unquote. Because I, Arthur Conquest, was so stunned at what I had witnessed, I attended a Dicker Commission meeting to file a complaint personally. On the 16th of December, 2017, the chair of the Dicker Commission told me at the beginning of the meeting that I'd be able to speak during the public comment period. After an hour and a half, the chair abruptly announced that the meeting would be adjourning. No explanation, no apology. And as I've witnessed in similar instances, other individuals have been told and experienced the same thing at Dicker meetings involving citizens who had attempted to file complaints or make comments. These haven't, there hasn't ever been in the 10 years, the new 3.12 law has been established, a single racial discrimination case carried to term. And referring discrimination cases to MCAD is like throwing something down an endless hole, which I say is by design, because it then opens the door for individuals to come before this body and say, Brookline's overall culture is not racist. We are trying very hard, unquote. I'm asking you please to vote favorable action on warrant Article 12. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sandman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Sandman speaking for the Select Board. First, I want to give a brief history. The Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Community Relations was created by town meeting in 2014. At that time, there were proposals to give it investigative powers, but the proposals failed to pass town meeting. The report of the committee that drafted the bylaw had cautioned that, and I quote, "A volunteer appointed body subject to the open meeting law should not be involved in specific matters that implicate complex privacy rights, labor law, or other factors that could compromise the town's interests." By November 2019, the emphasis had expanded to also offering people who might have been the target of discrimination a local means of recourse, not simply taking care of the town's interests. Why a local means? The Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination was criticized for being slow to act and for putting less significant complaints at the bottom of a tall pile. That record seems to have gotten worse based on an article in today's Boston Globe. So in 2019, town meeting gave CDICR power to investigate citizen complaints. That article, though, was not sufficiently detailed in terms of investigative procedure, and town meeting voted to postpone implementation, ultimately postponing it to July 1st, 2022. That's the background. CIDCR was given the task of coming up with the missing details. Article 12 offers them, and they strengthen the existing investigative authority of the commission. But if we don't pass Article 12, the 2019 bylaw giving the commission investigative powers will still take effect on July 1st. Article 12 establishes a new public body, a complaint committee, and creates a mechanism to issue subpoenas and levy monetary fines if the committee, that new complaint committee, not the commission itself, determines that a party acted in a discriminatory manner. Article 12 was the subject of extensive analysis and review by the Committee on Town Organization and Structure and by the Advisory Committee. They reviewed it in consultation with the petitioners, with town council, and other staff. Revisions were made that resolved some of the issues that were in dispute. The open questions are whether to give that new complaint committee the ability to levy fines and whether to give it the ability to request that the select board issue subpoenas on its behalf. Subpoena powers give the committee the ability to compel testimony from just about everyone, as I understand it. CTOS, Committee on Town Organization and Structure, has recommended referral back to the commission, as you've heard from Dick Benka. The advisory committee has recommended no action on the article, but offered 2 amendments. There's a need to protect the town's interests and a need to protect the rights of individuals, including people who feel they've been discriminated against and those who are accused of discrimination. It's not an easy balance to achieve, and a majority of the select board does not see that balance in the current version of Article 21. The fallback is the 2019 bylaw, which will remain in place if Article 12 fails. Given that fallback, the select board voted 3-2 to recommend no action on Article 12 as currently written. We discussed but did not vote separately on CTOS's recommendation for referral or on the advisory committee's proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelder. Mr. Batchelder, you may have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I thought you were going to do it.
There we go.
All right. Am I there?
Yep.
Okay. Sandy Batchelder. I'm a retired attorney. I've been a member of the Diversity Commission since its inception, and I was co-chair of the group that worked over a year to put together a new discrimination complaint process for the town. The new process was based on research on what other cities and towns have that are our neighbors. And we wrote our own version, but we didn't invent anything. You'll find it in Cambridge and Newton and in other places. And we had the benefit of talking to people in those towns, and none of them had a mechanism such as Mr. Banker described to you tonight, which annoys me because this is the first time I've heard of it. And it would have been nice if we had discussed this before we got to town meeting, and I'll have to shoot from the hip. But I think that leaving the existing bylaw in effect and having town council handle everything that our complaint committee was going to handle has problems. I think people may view town council doing investigations and holding hearings as a entity of the town looking after the town's interest. And like some people may be leery of entering the police discrimination complaint process. And what happens when someone who has a complaint against a town employee goes to town council to carry out the complaint? Town council is representing the town. They're not likely to be impartial. So I think there are a lot of problems in that, but I haven't had time to explore them because we heard of it tonight. It's not the way I would have liked to conduct business, but what I signed up to do is explain to you why I think subpoenas and fines are not a problem. Subpoenas can only be issued when one of the parties, probably the complainant, asks the complaint committee to issue it. They can issue a subpoena, but they can't enforce it. If they get voluntary compliance, fine, they'll get the materials or the testimony they want and can proceed from there. If the person who is the subject of the subpoena fights it, town council has to go to the select board to establish his authority to enforce the subpoena and then go to a court. And so there will be plenty of safeguards for the person who's the object of the subpoena. And I just don't see why the subpoena is a problem, and it is found in several of the bylaws of our adjoining cities and towns.
Mr. Batchelder, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you've now been talking for 4 minutes, and our normal maximum limit is 3 minutes. You didn't ask for extra time. Would you please conclude your remarks, sir?
I asked for 6.
I'm sorry. You didn't ask me.
Okay. I sent you an email today.
Go ahead.
The second issue is more complex, but I'll try and be brief about it. The problem with fines is a SJC, a legal case where they decided that the town of Brookline could not impose rent control without a home rule petition because of the special relationship between a landlord and tenant, a commercial relationship, if you will, a voluntary agreement that would be changed by rent control. I think that's easily distinguishable from the kind of cases that we're reporting here. there is no relationship between a person who discriminates and the object of the discrimination. In fact, it's the opposite of relationship. The person who's the object of discrimination has his constitutional rights violated. And I think a strong argument can be made that it's a different case entirely than rent control. We put into the bylaw that this would only happen if allowed by law, and meaning that before we would attempt to assert fines, we would go to town council and he would have to decide whether he wants to, in a particular situation, make arguments that the bylaw should apply, or tell us that we're wasting our time, we would lose the case. So we're not saying that we would have success in every case, but I think it's extremely important to have those provisions in the bylaw because it means we have some teeth that people who discriminate, and I'm not talking about big organizations that instruct their employees. I'm talking about.
Excuse me, Mr. Batchelder, you've now been 7 minutes, and I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, and I have a question of privilege.
Yeah.
But if you can conclude in a few seconds, I'll
I can't
do so.
I can. So, well, I'm sorry, I forgot what I was going to say, but I think that the bylaw won't be effective unless there is a chance that someone can be made to pay fines to the town because we're trying to change behavior. And as we've heard, the MCAD is a waste of time. And the only
So please
alternative
conclude, Mr. Batchelder. I'm
is the
sorry.
lawsuit. I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Benka?
Thank you very much. Just very quickly, I wanted to note that the CTONS written report that is supplement number 3 had the CTONS vote to refer, the recommended vote to refer, and also explicitly included the fact that, quote, town council believes there can be workarounds under the 2019 language. For example, the commission could delegate authority to town council to perform duties under the 2019 bylaw to ensure that it functions. This was not something that was hidden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Scoyac. All speakers will have 3 minutes, other than two to whom I've granted 4 minutes. Mr. Van Scoyac.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Quite frankly, CTOS has done such an
Let's
excellent
have your
job.
name and
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, John Van Scoyac. I'm speaking for myself individually from the Select Board. And I just want to say that I think CTOS has done, excuse me, such an excellent job of spelling out all of the questions and concerns raised by this particular proposal, that it would be foolish of me to try to do better than that. I do want to say that I've been an observer of this process of trying to work out an alternative to the article that was deferred in 2019, the original Arthur Conquest article. And it's been a real struggle because these are difficult issues. People who have pointed to the MCAD and the recent article in the Globe indicating that they are very badly backlogged with their work of adjudicating discrimination complaints, I think missed the point that they're backlogged because this work requires intense staff time. It requires much expertise, which in recent days, people have realized is harder and harder to hire. and deals with issues of great subtlety that have to be investigated thoroughly, but also have to be adjudicated sensitively by people experienced in these matters. And to think that something that is being held up as an example of an ineffective agency that has many times the funding and the authority and the expertise that we would ever be able to muster in Brookline, that somehow, because they have done their best and are still backlogged with cases, that somehow proves Brookline should do it on its own. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work for me as an argument. And I think the concerns raised by the CTOS deserve to be taken very seriously by this town meeting, and I hope they will be, and that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Ms. Greenwald, who will read a statement for Ms. Brown, who's indisposed.
Thank you. I'm Ann Greenwald, town meeting member, precinct 8, and I'm also a retired school nurse. Good evening. I'm reading the remarks for Deborah Brown, a co-petitioner for warrant articles 12 and 13. She has laryngitis. Massachusetts law outlaws treating people unfairly based on the person's membership of a protected class, such as race, national origin, religion, disability, age, sexual orientation, veteran status, or gender identity. Is Brookline the worst place for discrimination? Likely not, but we can do much better. With the passage of warrant articles 12 and 13, Brookline can be a leader in preventing discrimination, and just as we are a leader in addressing climate change. As Ms. Nobrega pointed out earlier, WBUR and the Globe reported on the incredible backlog at the MCAD. The situation there underlines the need for a local complaint process where discrimination issues can be addressed in a timely manner. And of course, that doesn't exclude people being able to also file a complaint with the MCAD. Deborah has represented agencies, complainants, and respondents, and one thing is abundantly clear: you need a fair process for everyone to receive justice. Brookline does not have such a process at this time. Warrant Article 12 proposes that a process that you will find in many similar communities in this area. We are not reinventing the wheel. Delay hurts the very people who are generally not represented in this room tonight. I urge you to treat Warrant Article 12 as a health, environmental, and economic justice law, and one that is long overdue. Discrimination affects one's health and well-being, and especially that of marginalized groups. Microaggressions are defined as a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. Microaggressions are directly correlated with physiological responses that lead to the onset of serious health conditions, such as hypertension, cardiac disease, breast cancer, and lower life expectancy. Strong civil rights laws, policies, and interventions can create an avenue to address microaggressions and improve health outcomes for those that experience discrimination. I'd like to point out that we have repeatedly addressed the adverse health effects of smoking, turf playing fields, etc. in Brookline. We need to have the same passion for addressing the adverse health effects of discrimination. They are very, very extreme. Complaints have gone unanswered or poorly answered in Brookline, and people just need to be heard. Absent procedures, people stop trusting the very systems that are supposed to be protecting them. We all know what happened in Gerald Alston's case. If we had had a clear and just complaint process in place, this would likely have been a very different outcome that was much more timely and better for everyone. Other examples related to discrimination that have happened to Deborah personally are that she was denied an apartment by a major realty group. She was not appointed to town committees and commissions, and she was denied handicapped access when she has a known disability. These are just her stories, and she knows her rights. Education is often good, and it's a good solution, but it doesn't replace the need for a clear, fair, and just complaint process. Justice delayed is justice denied, and supporting Articles 12 and 13 makes Brookline a stronger community. In 2022, Brookline must create a civil rights complaint process in order to call ourselves a just and civil town. So please vote no action on the motion to refer, vote no action on the motions to amend by the AC or the Rosenthal motion, and vote favorable action on warrant Articles 12 and 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoy. I'm not going to take a motion for the question. We're going to hear from at least 3 more people on each side. This is a very serious issue. People have devoted a great deal of time and energy in advocating on either side of the issue. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member and a member of the Advisory Committee, speaking specifically against the notion of assessing fines and urging a yes vote on the Pollock-Dowdy amendment. It's a simple question. Should the proposed complaint committee be able to fine a respondent? Petitioners say that fines give the bylaw teeth and act as a deterrent. I say the proposed authority to fine is inequitable. Town council advises, correct me if I'm wrong, that the town can fine only those under the town's specific jurisdiction. The complaint committee's reach, speaking only about fines, is pretty much limited to those licensed by the town to the exclusion of all others. So without suggesting there should be complaints against any of these, Bank of America, Chase, and Citizens Bank, no fine. Chestnut Hill Realty, Coldwell Banker, every developer, every real estate agent, no fine. Every landlord, no fine. But Martin's Coffee Shop, they could be fined. Dante's Pizzeria, they could be fined. The not-for-profit Coolidge Theater, fined. The not-for-profit Children's Hospital, not so much. Your doctor, not a bit. Your manicurist, yes. A local cab driver, sure. Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash, no. The authority to fine, as found in the petitioner's motion, is simply inequitable. Yet a CDICR commissioner told the advisory committee he supports the fines anyway. You heard it again tonight. He suggests that our small businesses are more likely to discriminate than large banks, landlords, and developers. Perhaps he and his colleagues need to shop more in Coolidge Corner, Brookline Village, and our other business districts, and meet our local, often women and minority merchants. I join with the advisory committee and with Brookline PACS in urging a vote in favor of equity. Treat our small local businesses fairly. Vote favorable action on deleting the fines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Card.
Good evening, town meeting. My name is John Card. I use he, they pronouns. I am a resident in Precinct 1, and I am here to speak in favor of the revised discrimination complaint process. In my professional life, I am an attorney. My work involves providing free legal services to disabled people with low incomes. Partnering with clients as well as medical and social service providers, I assist in overcoming barriers to healthcare and individual well-being. The majority of my work centers around supporting clients through instances of housing instability. This typically means using direct legal interventions such as eviction defense or public benefits appeals to support clients in minimizing stress and maximizing their ability to prioritize their health. In this work, I have often come across issues of discrimination and firsthand seen the gravity with which it can impact a person and community. Specifically in regards to housing discrimination, discrimination can begin or reinforce cycles of housing instability and leave significant lingering mental health issues. For members of marginalized groups, specifically Black and trans people, these effects are often compounded and are known to lead to further instances of housing instability and disparate health outcomes. This broadly means that for renters in this incredibly tight housing market, discrimination is a matter of grave seriousness. It has the potential to impact all stages of a renter's housing process, including a person's ability to maintain housing after it has been secured. Even in cases with successful outcomes, I have watched as clients struggle to overcome the effects of discrimination long after they've left an experience behind. Moreover, many of those that face discrimination do not have access to a free attorney and lack the resources, the time, and the ability to carry out these complex claims. This is why simply addressing discrimination through current avenues is not enough. We need more, and we need it desperately if we are to support the health and well-being of our most vulnerable. As a final note, on a systemic level, discrimination undermines the efficacy of our community values and pushes out those who could most benefit from our support. On an individual level, discrimination works to alienate those that experience it, and without intervention perpetuates serious negative health outcomes. It is important for our town to invest in mitigating discrimination before it happens, and doing so requires a robust understanding of how it operates in our local ecosystem. As a town often recognized for its progressive values and significant resources, Brookline has an opportunity to support its residents and address local issues of discrimination by updating its process to identify issues, patterns, and ultimately resolutions. Our town, especially those most at risk for discrimination, deserve the support of their leadership and the benefit of an improved local process. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Granoff.
Thank you. I'm Susan Granoff, Precinct 7. I'm also an attorney specializing in employment discrimination law and a member of the advisory committee's ad hoc subcommittee that spent nearly 2 months studying Articles 12 and 13, speaking for myself. Like all of us, I want justice for anyone who has experienced illegal discrimination in Brookline. And that is why I am here tonight urging you to vote no action on Article 12. Article 12 seeks to fight discrimination in Brookline by creating from scratch a new complex quasi-judicial process and structure for investigating and making determinations about complaints of alleged discriminatory acts committed in Brookline in violation of state law. But such a legal process and structure already exists. The Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. This independent state agency was expressly created by the state legislature over 75 years ago to enforce all of Massachusetts' anti-discrimination laws. The MCAD does everything that Article 12 is trying to do, only better. The MCAD is better because with an annual budget of over $8 million, it is staffed by trained, experienced, full-time professionals, assisted by over 25 advisory attorneys, as well as dozens of interns there to develop the complex professional skills and knowledge needed. In contrast, Article 12's implementation would rely on 7 newly appointed volunteers doing this important work in their spare time after undergoing a crash course in legal procedure and discrimination law. The MCAD is better because it uses clear, unquestionably legal and long-established procedures that protect the rights of all parties. In contrast, if Article 12 passes, Town Council plans to hire an outside attorney to create new rules of procedure and will need to train the 7 volunteers in these procedures and also in the complexities of interpreting discrimination laws and in how to conduct an impartial investigation, interview witnesses, submit interrogatories, issue written findings and determinations, and conduct impartial appellate hearings. Most importantly, the MCAD is better because it has remedies that gives complainants who have been discriminated against monetary compensatory damages, including emotional distress damages and attorney's fees, and also gives complainants the right to file their suit in court where they can also get punitive damages. In contrast, under Article 12, any fines assessed against a respondent go to the town, not the complainant. And under Article 12, a winning complainant who proves discrimination won't see a single cent in damages or attorney's fees or get permission to file a lawsuit in court. We've heard that the MCAD process takes too long, but any and every MCAD complainant has the right to withdraw their complaint from the MCAD after only 90 days, and then immediately they can file a lawsuit in court. Finally, implementing Articles 12 and 13 will cost the town hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, and that doesn't include the expenses related to years of litigation that the town is almost certain to face, according to town council, defending against the inevitable lawsuits that will be filed by losing respondents. So in conclusion, I ask, why do we need to try to reinvent the wheel, particularly when the end result will not be as good, not for the town and not for anyone who's been discriminated against? Why waste more time and money on setting up a procedure that even at best can't give complainants the kinds of remedies that they deserve and which they can already get elsewhere, and which will cost the town money that would be better used to fulfill those responsibilities, like educating our children and making our streets and roads safer, that only the town of Brookline can do. Based on town council's assurances, as described by Mr. Benka, I urge you to please vote no action on any version of warrant Article 12. Thank you.
Ms. Wu.
Thank you, Assistant Moderator. Chi-Chi Wu, Precinct 7. Brookline has a problem in ensuring accountability when there's discrimination. It may be a small handful of folks, but Brookline fails to deal with them properly. And you know, the saying isn't, it's just a few bad apples. The saying is a few bad apples spoil the bunch. When you fail to deal with bad apples, the toxic ripple effect poisons the entire organization. Now, warrant Articles 12 and 13, as proposed by the petitioners, tries to deal with the bad apples. And it does so the same way that the state and other municipalities do, by setting up a body to investigate instances of discrimination, subpoena witnesses and documents, and that can impose fines. This isn't crazy stuff. This is what MCAD and other municipalities do. The difference? This will be Brookline specific, so it won't have the years-long backlog at MCAD. Now, advisory committee wanted to remove the ability to impose fines. That's simply not sufficient, because what's the use of having a body that investigates the discrimination and makes findings, but can't take any substantive action? And frankly, the $300 per violation or day fine seems pretty reasonable. You know, as for the fact that the committee would be comprised of volunteers, you know, the entire town governance structure, select board, town meeting, numerous boards and commissions are comprised of volunteers. Planning, zoning, historic preservation, transportation, all of which make decisions that involve the impact of millions of dollars, all volunteers, not just $300 per day, millions of dollars. And you know, we need an independent body like this committee because this stuff is still going on. A recent Brookline Patch article reported that police officers accused of gender discrimination have been promoted in the fact of an active discrimination complaint. And there's history here too, where town departments, the previous select board and town council not only failed to hold wrongdoers accountable, they defended and enabled wrongdoers. And the result was the $11 million settlement with Gerald Alston. So yeah, history might give a little skepticism about having town council conduct the investigations. And as for the argument, we can't legally give this committee the power to impose fines. You know what? If the Attorney General's office says that's not legal, then that's on the Attorney General's office. Because if you don't pass anything, you're absolutely guaranteed nothing happens. Town meeting twice passed fossil fuel-free construction warrant articles, and twice the AG's office said they were illegal. I voted for the second one. I wasn't on town meeting for the first, and I don't regret voting in favor one bit. I'd much rather try and fail than not try at all. I urge you to do the same with warrant articles 12 and 13. 2 years of development, 30 meetings, public hearings, plus petitioners worked hard with both CTOS and advisory to modify the language so that the major point of contention has boiled down to the ability to propose file. And there's going to be interpretive rules to flesh out ambiguities, and there's a severability clause. So vote no on the Benka referral motion. We don't need more study. No on the AC motion, no on other motions, and yes on the main motions for Articles 12 and 13. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Bernard Green, member of the Select Board, but of course, speaking for myself. First, like everyone, I want people to have an opportunity to get redress against discrimination. But just saying that is what you want is really not good enough. The proposal must be meaningful and able to stand up to expected challenges. Related to that, I have just 3 questions that address some concerns that I have had that haven't been discussed. First, the risk of trivial complaints. To understand the thinking behind warrant Article 12, we must go back to warrant Article 24, the November 2019 town meeting. I'm not going to get into the details and implications of warrant Article 24 if warrant Article 12 is not passed, but in 2019, one of the petitioners of warrant Article 12, who was a petitioner on warrant Article 24, argued at a select board meeting that the article arose in part out of rudeness by an advisory committee member towards a member of a local indigenous peoples organization. Now, related to that, I was not at the meeting Mr. Conquest mentioned earlier with regards to which he made more detailed allegations with respect to the behavior of the advisory committee. But I think my point still stands. That is one concern I have is that warrant Article 12 will result in a deluge of minor complaints against neighbors or town staff or others that could be better handled in other ways. And let me just add, as almost a personal matter, that 2 of the petitioners of warrant Article 12 have attacked me on trivial matters in the past year. And I could file complaints against them under warrant Article 12 for accusing me, for example, of criminal acts and accusing me of linkage to the Ku Klux Klan. The statute of limitations under the warrant article is not expired, but don't worry because I always ignore such attacks. So one question is, what protections would there be against small complaints that are best handled using existing available town processes and that will not require the respondent to expend a lot of energy and resources to defend themselves before a determination that the complaint was implausible can be made. Secondly,
You have 1 minute, sir.
okay, despite the difficulty of filing complaints with MCAD as reported in a recent Globe article, warrant Article 12 will not provide a meaningful alternative to the slow MCAD. Better alternatives are our Chief Diversity Officer handling such complaints as he does now. Maybe that can be improved. We have the HR process and we have 2 police complaint options. Not perfect, but the PCAC is working on that. So another question is, what are the specific problems with the existing opportunities to file complaints on minor matters and what improvements would be satisfactory? And finally, and most importantly maybe, complaints by students. While complaints against students have been removed from the warrant, article, students as complainants are still a concern. This hasn't been discussed to my knowledge. So my final question is, what type of complaints are we thinking that students can bring, and against whom? Can they bring a complaint against teachers or against the school committee? What is the point of this part of the warrant article, or this aspect of the warrant
Please
article?
conclude, sir.
My conclusion is, Mr. Assistant Moderator, is thank you.
You're quite welcome. Ms. Ashkenazi.
Thank you. Miriam Ashkenazi from the Select Board, speaking on behalf of myself. I urge you to vote favorable action on the petitioner's motion for warrant Article 12. When we discussed this at the Select Board, there was broad consensus that discrimination is something this town wants to proactively address. How we do that is what warrant Article 12 is about. In my opinion, the more we do it, the more avenues we create, the more ways in and more options for people to access a complaint system, the better we are at capturing what is really happening. When we do something only one way because we did it that way before, or we are concerned about the unintended consequences, we do not protect ourselves from those unintended consequences. We just create different unintended consequences. In this case, we may be silencing people. We may be deterring them from coming forward, or we may be closing a door we really want to open. I will cite an example from my professional life. In medicine, for years, there was a tension between apologizing to patients when physicians made a mistake and the risk that an apology would be used in a lawsuit. Physicians, on the whole, wanted to apologize, but were prohibited from doing so by the risk management departments at the hospitals they worked at. At some point, someone realized apologies were important, and hospitals started exploring allowing physicians to apologize. And you know what happened? People sued less. Yes, an apology actually statistically reduced the likelihood of a lawsuit. In one study, events with medical errors were resolved by apology alone in 43% of the cases. Now hospitals have apology programs to teach physicians how to apologize, a complete turnaround. We thought we knew what an apology would do, but we had no idea. We think we know what the current complaint process does, but we have no idea. This current system was built on outdated ideas, and why people file discrimination complaints and what they want out of the process has changed. When I went to search for research on this, because we all know I love data and I love to cite research, the first titles that came up were, "Is filing a claim worth the risk?" This is a problem, and we are trying to address it by making speaking up easier, not harder, more
1 minute.
local, and ironically less political. I'm almost done, thank you. By opening more doors, this may be our apology moment, our opportunity to listen and act before we end up with a lawsuit, giving us the chance to do the right thing because it's the right thing. Finally, please note that Newton, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, and Arlington all have similar committees handling discrimination complaints. I urge you to consider the unintended consequences of not supporting warrant Article 12. Vote no action on referral, no action on amendments, and favorable action on the amended version submitted by the petitioners. I do hope we can hear from the Brookline High School student who's slated to speak after me. That person has waited very patiently for their turn. Thank you. I am done.
Thank you. Mr. Yes, is the point of order? By whom? Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9. I guess as a maker of an amendment, I'm worried that I'm not going to get reached because I did sign up to speak a few weeks ago. So that's it, basically. That's my point of order.
Well, sign up with me, Mr. Rosenthal. I'm going to hear from one more speaker, and then I'll take Mr. Wyszynski's motion for the question. Mr. Margolis?
Thank you, Mr. Gadsby, John Margolis, Precinct 7, and Library Trustees. A lot of the things that I was going to discuss have been said very well by others, so I can be briefer than I intended, I'm sure to the relief of many. One thing that I think has not been discussed here is what is the law that the committee would apply? In the language of the warrant article, it would be empowered to receive complaints of discrimination against individuals based on their membership in a Brookline protected class. But what constitutes discrimination? People often think they have been discriminated against, but they haven't been discriminated in a way that the law will provide relief for. let me give you an example from another part of the law. If someone steps on your toe on the MBTA, could you sue them? Yes, you could. Would it be worth it? No. That's the kind of trivial violation of a law. At least that's clear. But what is discrimination? I do discrimination cases. I represent plaintiffs in employment discrimination. I do not represent defendants. So I see things primarily from plaintiff's point of view. But there are a lot of times when I look at a case and I say, this is not discrimination. And the law has developed to be very complex. There are thousands of cases out there with judges, trained judges, lawyers who've gone through the process of being appointed to the bench, who are subject to review by higher courts. And the law has been developed through their decisions. And by the way, in my estimation, judges often get it wrong. The idea of a group of civilians, people not necessarily trained in the law, not experienced with discrimination cases, making decisions is to me a highly questionable way to bring something that is, I think, thought to be called justice, but in particular cases may not be. I support referral. If referral fails, I support the proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a motion to call the question by Mr. Wyszynski, seconded by Ms. Murphy. Oh, she had a question. Okay. Mr. Wyszynski calls the question. Is there a second? Yes, no, don't worry. Mr. Sandman seconds. Before we vote, or even before I explain the vote, let me read the people who have signed up to speak in favor of the petitioner's motion. Ms. Lee, who's a student at Brookline High School, Mr. Lepson, Mr. Tamayo, Mr. Ananian, Ms. Schweitzer, Mr. Levy, and Ms. Kovac, I guess. Opposed are Ms. Hummel, Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Jonas, and Mr. Day. Lined up to ask comments, to provide comments or ask questions are Mr. Penzel, Mr. Leibovitz, Ms. Da Silva, Mr. Birnbaum, Ms. Stone, Ms. Zimmerman, Mr. Homer, and Ms. Murphy. I mentioned David Day as a speaker against. If I didn't, that's what he is. So a vote requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting to call the question, that is to terminate debate. If you vote in favor of it, we will go directly to a series of votes that I'll explain that somewhat complicated. If the motion fails to get a 2/3 vote, we will continue to hear from those who have signed up to speak for and against, and from some of the people who have been lined up to make comments or ask questions. Requires a 2/3 vote, and we're ready for a vote. Voting period has commenced. Voting period is over. We have the vote, please. Motion fails by a vote of 130 in favor, 106 opposed, and 11 abstentions. Tina Lee. L.I.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm a sophomore attending Brookline High School and a member of the town's Immigrant Advancement Committee, and I'm speaking for myself. First, I would like to introduce myself and tell me a little bit about me. My parents and I immigrated to the United States 5 years ago and bought a house in Brookline. I've been attending Brookline public schools ever since, and my parents have been working in Brookline and surrounding towns. While my family is just like any other ordinary Brookline families, we have faced many discrimination based on our race and citizenship status. For example, once my family and I were denied of service because we couldn't speak English. And unfortunately, I am far from being alone. According to town's diversity report, there's a 30% foreign-born population in Brookline. So despite how many people in this town pride themselves as being progressive, me and many others know from our own experience that it is far from the case. Even worse, with our current ineffective and inaccessible system to file for complaints, people like me don't have a voice to speak up about the struggles we face. The Brookline Diversity Report shows you that 10% of the entire Brookline population have limited English proficiency. That means 1 in every 10 Brookline residents doesn't speak English. How can we expect those people to have the time, ability, and energy to wait months or even years for a response to complaints when making ends meet at the new country is their top priority? How can we expect those people who doesn't even understand English to dig through our confusing government websites and fill out endless forms just to complain about the discrimination they face? Quite frankly, they can't. That's why we need a more concrete system to address discrimination in our town, as detailed in Article 12, that is timely and accessible to everyone, including me and many other immigrant families like mine. This article will let many immigrants and people of color know that they're heard, seen, and welcomed in Brookline. This article shows them that they have the power to speak up for themselves, despite the lack of accessibility and representation in our current system. So I strongly urge you to vote in favor of Article 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hummel.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Amy Hummel, Town Meeting Member Precinct 12, and member of the Advisory Subcommittee on this article, but I'm speaking for myself. The material in the combined reports makes it clear that this warrant article, 2 years in the making, was and is highly problematic. I'm going to just kind of remind us of a little bit of where we are, but not go too much into detail around it. It took 5+ meetings of both CTOS and the advisory subcommittee on this, and unknown hours of work outside those meetings by a few dedicated attorneys to work through no fewer than 15 of the serious legal concerns identified in the original draft. Although many of those concerns have been addressed in some way, remaining issues include, but are not limited to, the power to assess fines, as you've heard, that not all parties will be subject to. That's patently inequitable. Subpoena powers that deeper pockets can better navigate than others might. And the fact that the select board may have to weigh in on that risks politicizing the subpoenas and I think further escalating disputes rather than helping resolve. There's likelihood of unwarranted reputational damage, privacy concerns, the likelihood of litigation against the town, and I think very importantly, the inability to award damages to harm complainants, right? So remember, any fines the town might levy will go to the town. Complainants who want money damages or may need them will still need to go before the MCAD. So although many positive changes have come about, not all address the original concerns in total either. For example, although the elected body, the select board, will now appoint members of the complaint commission. Originally, an appointed body was going to further appoint another body. That's been quote unquote fixed, but we heard many times after that change from petitioners that the members of CDCICR, again, an appointed body, would nonetheless be instrumental in identifying complaint commission candidates as a practical matter. So the idea of appointed advocates who are not directly accountable to the voters, with a significant hand in appointed would-be adjudicators, is deeply troubling to me. I also want to address this idea of, that other
1 minute.
I'm sorry.
1 minute.
Oh, okay. I also want to address that we've heard from other.
I'm sorry, you asked for 4. Go ahead.
I did, thank you. We've heard from other petitioners or from petitioners, not just other speakers tonight, that a few communities have commissions similar to this, but they're not the same. Cambridge, for example, does have a body like this, but it's a funded body. I think they have about a $500,000 budget. They have people who do this as a job. And they also had a home rule petition, enabling them to do certain things. So they're similar, but they're different. They're not the same. So well, all of us want to meaningfully address discrimination, but to do this, the laws themselves have to be fair and effective. So the question we really should ask ourselves tonight is, can a local, quasi-judicial, volunteer complaint commission do the job well enough or fairly enough when compared to other professionally staffed bodies like the MCAD, slow as it may be? And I don't think we can. If we want the MCAD to function better, we should advocate for more robust funding for that, right? There's work to be done at the state level. Our best outcome locally is to support efforts to increase mediation resources in town if we need them. We don't need a complaint commission to help people who need help now. We don't have to have that. It's not a black or white decision, right? It's not an either or. And we should help create or improve a more formalized support system for individuals with claims that properly belong before the MCD. It may be a long and difficult process. I have no doubt of that. We can support individuals maybe better than we do now doing that. I think that's where our energy should focus. So please join me in voting yes on referral. And if referral fails, vote yes on both amendments. And finally, on no action. We don't need to create a complaint commission, a complex commission, and create potentially problematic issues, in order to help people in town locally. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tamayo. Tamayo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. My name is Carlos Mario Tamayo, and I represent Precinct 2. My fellow town meeting members, hi. I'm a new town meeting member for Precinct 2, and today I urge you to vote in favor of Warrant Article 12. I've been a Brookline housing resident since 2012, and these spaces aren't usually available to people like me, so I'm just grateful and honored to represent not just people of color, but also low-income people. Thank you. And with regards to Warrant Article 12, it's really special to me because it would mean that people like me would have the resources and the support that we need and deserve. As the petitioner, Ms. Nobrega, stated, we can do better. People of color in Brookline don't feel that they are being heard. And there have been complaints for years and years, and yet nothing changes for the better. I worry about people of color like my mother, who is proudly Latina from Medellin, Colombia, but because she doesn't speak English, has been discriminated in Brookline many times. What I love about it is that it's more intentional about addressing the fallbacks of the current processes, including unnecessary delays and even questions and concerns regarding racism from the very entity that's supposed to help us. We cannot wait any longer to be heard. Discrimination is a health emergency, and we must act now. In conclusion, without Warrant Article 12, my people of color, and those who are low income are at risk. A no vote would be devastating to vulnerable communities. To me, my fellow town meeting members, I have read about Brookline in my history books, and I have no doubts that favorable action on warrant Article 12 will continue to make history because, as a fellow town meeting member said, it's better to try than to not have tried at all. We have a responsibility to create this law, and by doing so, we will set an example. The committee performed as asked, and second guessing should not yet again leave residents, people like me and my non-English speaking mother, with no easy route to conflict resolution. Please let us avoid another Gerald Alston case. We can do better. I believe that we can. I really hope you can all join me in being intentional about this issue with a resounding favorable vote. If you have any more questions about my experience, please feel free to reach out. And finally, thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Rosenthal, I will take it on faith that you asked to speak to your amendment and that you asked for 5 minutes. I'd like to suggest that your request may have been tucked in one of your normal emails and have been a little difficult to dig out, but go ahead, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, well, thank you. And it wasn't a long email. I did paste.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a long one. You're going to have to speak closer to the microphone, Mr. Rosenthal, so we can hear you.
Well, it's a laptop. I hope I'm close enough. Is this good enough? Well, I'll just keep trying. If you can't hear me, I'll start yelling. First, I want to express appreciation for what you're doing for stepping forward to help. I think many people don't appreciate how hard that job is, and I especially welcome it. I was not going to talk too much on this. I wanted to add just a couple of things on the subpoena power, but now that I've finally been reached, I have a few other thoughts that I want to offer. Relative to subpoena power, well, first, before I say anything, I do believe that there should be a place in the town for complaints for what I'm calling regular people against regular people. And I think that for that reason, I'm basically, in the overall sense, pleased to have that in the Diversity Commission in some fashion. I just share many of the concerns that have been stated about particular issues by CTOS advisory members and select board members. And for that reason, I'm planning to vote for referral for the 2 amendments if that fails. And if that all fails, I'm going to vote for the article because I think that it's better than what's in place from 2019. And what I do hope is that whatever happens on referral, that the town hall officials, particularly on the 6th floor, including town council's office, will keep working on this because I think it definitely needs improvements as written, and especially as it was written in 2019. Now, one of those issues that I do want to get to is one that has not been mentioned, and I mentioned it in my write-up, and the write-up was about 5 pages, and it's buried in there, which is the conflicting or parallel complaint procedures. I do not believe that this article should cover complaints against town staff, whether it's police or non-police, because there are existing processes for that. And I have raised this repeatedly. If someone goes to town hall and says, where do I file a complaint against a cop or a DPW worker? If they go to the clerk's office, what are they going to be told? You've got various choices, and I'm not going to tell you how to proceed, but here they are. And those other processes, the human resource one for all staff and the police one for police, have been carefully worked out. They're much more thoughtful, frankly, than this particular process that's before us. And they have been approved, or at least tacitly approved, by the unions. I think that this process, if it goes into effect for town staff, would be a collective bargaining issue. And The police I've worked with over the years have accepted the disciplinary process that we put in place, which includes civilian review by the select board with subpoena power. So getting back to subpoena power, the two things that I want to add are the question has been raised by one member of the drafting committee who curiously no longer lives in Brookline and does have training in the law, but didn't practice as a lawyer. He said, well, what is there that forbids giving subpoena power to a town? That's the wrong question. The question is, what is it that allows it? Now, I've made a case that disagrees with town council that the statute for subpoena power does not apply. But the one thing
You
I
have
want to add
one
to
minute.
that in response to that question is, it's from a case called MCAD versus Liberty Mutual for lawyers. Here's a site, 371 Mass 186, 1976. Quote, the power to issue a subpoena is one which the commission, it's MCAD, would not possess absent statutory authority. So the bottom line is you cannot have subpoena power without statutory authority. And the case relied on out of Worcester is very different from a town than a city. So that's the legal issue. And I've stated in my 5 pages some policy issues why I don't think it should be adopted for this bylaw. If anyone were going to be granted subpoena power for investigations in Brookline, other than the select board for the police ones, I'd say it should be the human resource office and board because they have professional expertise in this. They don't have subpoena power in their complaint procedures. So I don't think it should be given to this new body. Now, the other thing I want to say is that
So hurry up and say it because you're out of time.
yeah, all right. Well, I'm going to say one more thing, which is all of the process issues that have been identified, I share those concerns. But the one that I want to mention that has not been identified, and it's the biggest process issue in any complaint process, which is what is the burden of proof? I don't think that should be left to the rulemaking power of town council's office. I think that should be in the bylaw. I do bar discipline cases. Massachusetts has the worst burden of proof in the country, preponderance of evidence. And in my mind, to find someone guilty of discrimination, it should be a higher burden and it should be in the bylaw. So I think those are the only things I wanted to add. And I will state appreciation for being called upon.
Thank you. I'm going to go take some comments and questions from the floor, so to speak. Mr. Penzel.
There we go. Hi, my name is Mark Penzel. I'm a Precinct 2 member. I'm just recently retired as a trial attorney with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where I spent 22 years. And prior to that, I was 10 years with a private law firm doing plaintiff side employment law. So I know employment discrimination law very well, and I wouldn't need any training, although I would need training on housing. First, I have a very mixed mind of all this. I totally agree with everybody's concern about discrimination. It's been my life's work to fight it. But I would not advise, at least with respect to employment, anybody filing a complaint with this committee as currently constituted or as proposed, because my client wouldn't be able to get anything out of it other than perhaps an apology. And an apology is a good thing. And I heard Ms. Ashkenazi talk about that. But if it's an apology, you don't need fines. I do believe if you're going to have a committee like this, you do need subpoena power. You don't have to use it, but having the threat of it has always been good. That's what we did at EEOC. We had subpoena power, but we didn't necessarily always exercise it. But the threat of it was always useful. And even if you threaten a subpoena and then they don't produce it, you can draw an adverse inference of discrimination if they don't cooperate. So that's an investigative response. The statute, the ordinance that we propose seems to be drawn from all sorts of different sources. For instance, the Cambridge ordinance, which I just read today, doesn't allow complaints against anybody from the town, department or otherwise, and requires that any of those types of complaints be referred to the MCAD. I agree wholeheartedly with what Attorney Granoff said about the MCAD and its ability to grant relief, and you don't have to stay there. You can go to court. Preponderance of the evidence, as Marty Rosenthal just brought up, I mean, that's a fine burden of proof. It's what every court and jury requires. I mean, you don't have to have clear and convincing evidence to prove discrimination. So finally, I would vote for referral because I think there's still lots of problems. I would vote against the amendment to strip subpoena power. I would vote for the amendment to strip fines because I don't think it provides the complainant anything. And there are also problems with how the fines are defined, whether it's per violation as Cambridge does, or as something other than that, apparently for per day, I thought, and that doesn't make sense to me. But I would, push come to shove, vote for, as Marty Rosenthal said, if it all sort of gets to a vote on the Article 12, I would vote for Article 12 because I think it is worthwhile doing, but I think we could do a whole lot better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leibovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Alec Lebovitz, Precinct 8 Town Meeting Member. I think we've heard a lot about the various procedural questions regarding this warrant article, so I won't dwell on those. What I want to just reiterate what we've heard tonight is the overwhelming need and desire in our community to pass something like this. Like we heard so eloquently from Ms. Wu, Mr. Tamayo, and others, people of color in Brookline do not feel heard, and they do not feel like their concerns, their legitimate concerns regarding discrimination are being addressed. We have seen numerous examples of this organically arising in the community, from the courageous walkout at the Brookline High School only months ago, led by students of color and from marginalized backgrounds, to the incredibly well-written letter submitted by Miss Barksy L. Noor to the Boston Globe only this weekend. And of course, to the lack of redress, I would argue, at the town level, to a pattern and number of high profile instances of discrimination within municipal departments that have resulted in some cases in catastrophic outcomes for the town. Frankly, I think the need could not be more clear to us as elected leaders in the town that some action is warranted tonight. I am a supporter of warrant Article 12 and the original petitioner's motion. What I was compelled to speak about tonight was to strongly urge my fellow town meeting members to oppose the motion to refer. I think to do nothing at a time like this, particularly when as we've heard tonight, to default back to the status quo is to condemn residents to waiting up to or in excess of a decade for MCAD proceedings to go forward, or to seek, in the case of municipal employees, redress from an HR department that has, as far as I'm concerned, failed in multiple high-profile instances recently regarding discrimination, does not seem wise and in essence seems antithetical to the progressive principles that I know we as a town hold so dear. And in conclusion, I would just like to say, if you're hang up or you're on the fence about this vote, are the fines, are the subpoenas, I strongly, strongly urge you to vote no on the motion to refer so that we can take up those issues as a body and deliberate. I think to do nothing at a time like this would be, frankly, insulting to many of our residents and would be unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator.
Ms. Weaver moves to call the question. We've been at this for 2 hours. I think we've heard a substantial, it's been seconded, a substantial discussion on both sides of the issue. And I think we're ready to vote, but that's not up to me, it's up to you. Requires a 2/3 vote. Vote in favor will terminate debate. Vote opposed will continue to debate. And I have the following people lined up to speak in favor of the petitioner's motion: Mr. Lepson, Mr. Ananian, Ms. Schweitzer, Mr. Levy, and Ms. Kovac. I have the following people signed up to speak in opposition: Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Jonas, Mr. Day. The following people have questions or comments: Ms. De Silva, Mr. Birnbaum, Ms. Stone, Ms. Zimmerman, Mr. Homer, Ms. Murphy, Ms. Park, and Ms. Becker. And we're ready for a motion for the question. It's 11:15. Yes. The voting period has started. Voting period is terminated. May I have the vote, please? Motion carries by a 2/3 vote, 204 in favor, 35 opposed, and 7 abstentions. You put up the voting slide on the screen, please. Okay, let me explain how we'll be voting for this on these motions. The first motion we will take is the motion to refer, Mr. Benka's motion to refer, which is on supplement 3, page 1, to refer the entire matter of both Articles 12 and 13 back to the CDICR. If that succeeds, we'll take a motion to adjourn. If it fails, we will vote on 2 amendments of the main motion, the main motion being the motion on the pink supplement number 1, pages 1 to 13. 2 amendments. We'll vote first on Mr. Rosenthal's motion to delete the subpoena power from that motion. We will then vote on Mr. Pollack's motion to delete the power to fine. We will finally vote, this is all assuming that the referral motion failed, finally vote on the main motion, either as amended by the Pollack and Rosenthal motions to amend, or without those amendments. And when we emerge from all of this, I will let you know how we'll proceed under Article 13. So the first motion is the motion to refer Mr. Benka's on supplement 3, page 1. If this passes by a majority vote, all right, you can ignore the flow chart and listen to what I had to say. Yeah, please. I'm not sure how and to what extent the flow chart was incorrect, but somebody seems to think it was. In any case, I'll lead you through this one vote at a time. We first vote on the motion to refer. If an affirmative vote on the referral motion will terminate our discussion under Articles 12 and 13. And so I think we're ready for a vote on that. Yes means referral and terminate. No means we'll then vote on the amendments in the main motion. Ready for a voting period is commenced. It's a majority vote. All of these votes are majority votes. Have the vote, please. Motion carries. Referral motion carries by a vote of 153 in favor, 94 opposed, and 5 abstentions. It is 10 minutes of 11. I will entertain a motion to adjourn until 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. That motion has been made. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. This is a motion to adjourn till tomorrow night. If you defeat it, I guess we'll plow on, but yep, we're ready for a vote. The vote, please. Motion carries by a vote of 235 in favor, 13 opposed, and 3 abstentions. Town meeting is adjourned until 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.